Shakespeare never wore a watch, yet his writing understands time better than most watch collectors ever will. For centuries, people have treated Shakespeare as literature, but his work is also something else. It is an exploration of the forces that govern human life: power, identity, chaos, ambition, reputation, and legacy. Horology lives inside those same forces. Watches measure seconds, but the people who design them, collect them, and wear them are responding to something far older: our relationship with time itself. This series explores that relationship through 17 acts, not as a collection of watch reviews, but as a structured examination of how the themes that Shakespeare wrote about continue to shape horology today. Shakespeare's plays, they're often taught using a simple 5-act model, but beneath that surface, his work repeatedly follows a deeper dramatic progression. The world: disruption, escalation, collapse, and resolution. A movement through which human systems are built, tested, and ultimately understood. The horological acts follow the same progression. The early acts establish the natural conditions in which time exists: depth, the moon, obsession, light, the sea, lunar cycles, human ambition, and sunlight. These are forces larger than human systems. Before clocks, before gears, before oscillators, there was the world itself. Nature establishes the stage, exactly as Shakespeare does. From nature, the story moves into civilization. Bells, honour, morality, drift. Time becomes structured. Church bells regulate cities. Duty shapes identity. Ethics shapes behaviour. Time becomes part of the social order, not simply a natural phenomenon, but a framework for human life itself. But systems rarely remain stable. Ambition appears, jealousy appears, identity begins to fracture. In the horological acts, this instability takes its own forms: monsters, order, mercy, identity, power. Human behaviour begins reshaping time. Collectors pursue greater specifications. Design becomes expression. Technology becomes status. Timekeeping evolves because human nature evolves. Eventually, every system meets its limits. Nature returns, pressure rises, and order begins to fracture. In these acts, the world expands again. The stage grows larger. Chaos enters the structure. Like the storm in King Lear or the collapsing ambitions of Macbeth, the system breaks because time ultimately belongs to no one. Shakespeare rarely ends his stories with victory. He ends them with recognition, a truth about the human condition. In King John, he writes a single line: "I am time's subject." Not its master, not its controller, its subject. That sentence reframes everything that came before it. The dive watches, the moon phase complications, the railway clocks, the atomic reference watch, every instrument humanity has built to measure time is an acknowledgement of that basic truth. We do not control time, we observe it. Look closely at the watches that appear throughout these acts, and another pattern becomes visible. The progression mirrors civilization's relationship with time. The early acts reflect natural cycles: the sea, the moon, the sun. Then mechanical discipline appears: escapements, chronometers, precision engineering. Later acts move into technological escalation: quartz, high-frequency oscillators, electronic timekeeping, and finally, the atomic reference watch. Humanity listening to the most precise clock it has ever created. What this series explores, this is not a literature lesson, and it's not a traditional watch review series. It is a study of how horology reflects the same human forces that Shakespeare explored in verse: power, identity, chaos, reputation, legacy. Horology did not invent time, it refined how we live with it. One final curiosity: there are 17 acts in this series, and that number, it carries a quiet Shakespearean resonance. Sonnet 17, it's one of Shakespeare's reflections on time and on survival. In it he asks a simple question. What remains when time erodes everything? His answer is unexpected. Record, memory, verse, something that continues after the moment itself has passed. Shakespeare writes, "But were some child of yours alive, that time, you should live twice in it and in thy rhyme." Shakespeare believed poetry could carry something of the present into the future. Horology does something similar. A watch does not stop time, it records its passing. Each oscillation of a balance wheel, each sweep of a seconds hand, each quiet impulse inside a movement, a mechanical witness to the same force that Shakespeare described in verse. So perhaps it is fitting that this story concludes with Act 17, a small acknowledgement that time will outlast all of us, but the things we build to measure it may allow a fragment of the present to travel forward with it. And remember, William Shakespeare never wore a watch, but he understood time better than most watch collectors ever will. The most important dive watch in history was named after one of his lines. A moon phase complication, it echoes his obsession with instability. Macbeth understood the psychology of the upgrade cycle. Hamlet diagnosed drift centuries before Quartz tried to correct it. We think horology measures seconds. Shakespeare knew it measures morality. This is not a literature lesson, it's a study of how watchmaking borrowed its deepest ideas from a playwright who never even seen a balance wheel. And once you see the link, you'll never be able to unsee it. Welcome back to Horological. Act 1, Depth. The Tempest in the 50 Fathoms. Blancpain named the first modern dive watch the 50 Fathoms. The name is poetic, not technical. It echoes the Tempest. Act 1, Scene 2. Full fathom 5, thy father lies. A fathom is a unit of depth, but Shakespeare was not measuring engineering tolerances. He was measuring burial, transformation and submersion. The sea in the Tempest, it's not scenery, it is force. It changes what it touches. Blancpain's genius was not the rotating bezel alone, it was naming a dive instrument after verse. The original 50 Fathoms, it translated literary depth into mechanical depth. Today a Blancpain 50 Fathoms automatic sits in the wrist, an inky dial, a measured disciplined presence, surface from a dive wearing it, and the symbolism almost writes itself. We measure depth in metres now, yet we borrow the language of fathoms. Poetry survived the pressure test. Act 2, The Moon, A Midsummer Night's Dream in Lunar Time. If the Tempest is depth, A Midsummer Night's Dream is instability. The moon governs the entire play. Puck observes, the moon methinks looks with a watery eye. Under its influence lovers lose reason. Perception shifts. Reality bends. Historically tracking the moon mattered. For navigation, for agriculture, for tides, for ritual, before marine chronometers solved longitude, before satellites synchronised the globe, human beings looked upward. The Tudor 1926 moon phase, it tracks something we no longer need to track. And yet we do, because the moon is no longer about utility, it is about rhythm. A moon phase complication preserves an older relationship with time. When time was governed by orbit, not oscillation, Shakespeare understood lunar psychology, instability, transformation. The moon phase watch preserves that tension. We no longer need it, but we still want it. That is horology at its most human. And when cycles give way to ambition, time changes character. Act 3, Obsession, Macbeth in the collector's mind. Macbeth is a study in obsession. Time in Macbeth is relentless. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Time suffocates. Time advances without mercy. Macbeth would have made a formidable modern watch collector, driven, relentless, never satisfied with good enough. Accuracy, progression, power. But Macbeth's tragedy is misalignment. He tries to control destiny. He tries to accelerate time. Collectors sometimes do the same. Upgrade cycles, specification escalation, perfection chasing. Macbeth teaches us something very uncomfortable. Time does not bend its will to ambition. It simply proceeds relentlessly. A superlative chronometer does not conquer time. It moves with it, cleanly. Act 4, Light, Romeo and Juliet and the Sundial. Before mechanical clocks, sundials ruled. Shakespeare constantly references daylight as timekeeper. In Romeo and Juliet, the day is hot. Time is measured by heat, by shadow, by the position of the sun. The sundial is time without mechanics, pure light, pure shadow, no escapement, no mainspring, just the earth turning. Humanity moves from celestial time to regulated time, from shadow to oscillation, from orbit to escapement. A modern mechanical watch, it is an attempt to internalise the sun, to trap daylight inside a balance wheel. But the shift changed something. Celestial time was communal, shared, cosmic, observable. Mechanical time became personal, portable, private. That transition, it's not just technological, it is philosophical, and when time becomes audible, its authority changes again. Act 5, Bells, Julius Caesar and Sonnerie au Passage. In Julius Caesar, the clock hath stricken 3, public timekeeping had arrived. Church bells, they structured society, they regulated markets, prayer, power. A Sonnerie au Passage replicates that civic ritual, but on the wrist. The Christopher Ward bell canto, it strikes the hour automatically. Once a bell tower declared time for a day, it declared time for the city. Now a watch announces it for one person. Private luxury has inherited public authority. The sound of the hour, it used to belong to everybody. Now it belongs to the wearer. Time evolves, but the ritual remains. Act 6, Honour and Lineage, Henry IV and Martial Time. In Henry IV, time is tied to honour, to battle, to reputation. Prince Hal must grow into his destiny. Time shapes his identity. Panerai, born of military necessity, embodies that same philosophy. Functional, purpose-built, unromantic, not decorative time, duty-bound time. In both, time is not an accessory, it is responsibility, and responsibility eventually meets its limit. Act 7, Morality, the Sonnets in Sonnet 60. Shakespeare writes, like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. That is the sweeping seconds hand, wave after wave, impulse after impulse. Mechanical watches do not stop morality, they dramatise it. Each oscillation is a heartbeat surrogate. We measure time, we measure what we cannot slow. The sweeping hand is not progress, it is erosion, and it will sweep us aside as effortlessly as it sweeps the dial. That is Shakespearean. And finally, there is dislocation. Act 8, Hamlet, the time is out of joint. In Hamlet, the time is out of joint. This is horological language. Time dislocated, time misaligned. Pair this with a Bulova Marine Star Precisionist, a 262 kHz quartz movement, absurdly precise, and yet the irony remains. We chase perfect timekeeping in a world where time was never broken. Hamlet feels disorder, we correct the drift. Both are attempts to restore alignment. Shakespeare never wore a watch, but he understood depth, cycles, obsession, light, bells, and morality. He understood that time is not just a number, it is force. Horology didn't invent time, it refined how we live with it. Perhaps that is a quiet link between Stratford-upon-Avon and Switzerland. We build machines to measure what he measured in verse. Act 9, Monsters, Othello and the Seiko Arnie. In Othello, Shakespeare describes jealousy as something terrifying. It is a monster begot upon itself. A creature born in the mind, suspicion grows, feeds in imagination, and it eventually becomes real. Collectors understand this process perfectly. Needs appear where none previously existed. More loom, more depth rating, more complications. The Seiko Arnie embodies that instinct. Large, aggressive, analogue and digital combined. A watch that almost looks excessive. A watch that does almost everything. A horological monster, if you will. But like Othello's jealousy, the monster exists because we created it. Sometimes watches become extreme because collectors demand the extreme. Act 10, Order, The Taming of the Shrew and the Casio F91W. The Taming of the Shrew explores discipline, a chaotic world forced into structure. The Casio F91W is one of the purest expressions of ordered time ever built. There is no sweep, no interpretation, just digits advancing with perfect obedience. Mechanical watches express time as motion. Digital watches impose time as mathematics. The F91W does not negotiate with time, it enforces it. Act 11, Mercy, The Merchant of Venice and the Omega Seamaster. In The Merchant of Venice, Portia declares, the quality of mercy is not strained. Mercy cannot be forced, it must flow naturally. The Omega Seamaster refined the dive watch concept into something unmistakably Omega. They did not invent the dive watch, but they did refine it until the design felt inevitable. The helium escape valve, the dial balance, the case geometry, nothing feels strained. The watch just simply works effortlessly, like genuine mercy itself. Act 12, Identity, Twelfth Night and the Tissot PRX. Twelfth Night is Shakespeare's great play of mistaken identity. Characters disguise themselves, roles blur, appearances deceive. The Tissot PRX occupies a similar ambiguity. It looks vintage, yet it's thoroughly modern. It appears luxurious, yet it remains accessible. Integrated bracelet watches exist between categories, sports watch or dress watch. Gerald Genta became the architect of the integrated sports watch, designs that influenced the entire industry, much like Shakespeare influenced the entire English language itself. Influence and imitation appear everywhere.
This is a homage to the first CC8. This is a homage.
Exactly like Twelfth Night, identity shifts depending on perspective. Act 13, Power, Richard III and the Flieger. Richard III begins with the line, now is the winter of our discontent. The play examines ambition and the pursuit of power. Flieger watches were born from military necessity, large cases, maximum legibility and function above decoration. They project highly legible authority, but Shakespeare reminds us of something important. Power pursued without restraint eventually collapses. Even the strongest watch design cannot stop time. Act 14, the world. As You Like It and the Casio World Timer. In As You Like It, Shakespeare writes, all the world's a stage. Human life unfolds across locations, roles and shifting circumstances. The Casio World Timer reflects that idea. Multiple time zones, a map of the world on the dial. It reminds the wearer that time is not universal. It's always morning somewhere and night somewhere else. The stage expands and timekeeping expands with it. Act 15, Chaos. King Lear and the Steel Dive Willard Diver.
This is a homage. This is a homage. This is a homage.
King Lear is Shakespeare's greatest storm. Nature becomes hostile. Wind, rain, madness, betrayal. The famous storm scene shows Lear confronting chaos directly. Dive watches exist because nature is unforgiving. Pressure, darkness, isolation. The Willard lineage was built for environments where failure cannot be tolerated. A diver entering deep water, it faces the same truth that Lear discovered in the storm. Nature does not negotiate. Act 16, Legacy. Much Ado About Nothing and the Bulova Lunar pilot. Much Ado About Nothing explores reputation. Characters are judged by what people believe rather than what is actually true. Horology has its own legends. The Bulova lunar pilot carries one of the most famous. During Apollo 15, astronaut Dave Scott wore a Bulova chronograph on the lunar surface after his Omega Speedmaster failed. Whether mythologised or documented, the story changed the watch forever. Reputation became legacy. For both models, exactly as Shakespeare understood, stories reshape reality. Shakespeare never studied horology. He never saw a cannon pinion or a quartz oscillator, but he understood the forces that shape timekeeping: order, power, identity, chaos, reputation. Horology did not invent time, it simply built machines to live alongside it. And perhaps that's the quiet link between Shakespeare and watches. We build instruments to measure seconds. Shakespeare measured the people living inside those seconds. Shakespearean Time, Part 3, Act 17, the final act, time itself. Shakespeare never wore a watch, but by now you probably already suspect something really strange, because over the past arc we have explored something unexpected: depth, cycles, obsession, honour, morality, power, chaos, and legacy. 16 acts, 16 ways that human beings have tried to understand time, and yet Shakespeare never described a watch. Not once. Instead, he kept returning to something far more unsettling: our relationship to time itself. And in King John, he writes a line so brutally simple it almost feels modern. I am time's subject, not its master, not its controller, its subject. And that line might be the most horological sentence that Shakespeare ever wrote. Because for thousands of years, human beings have been trying to do something impossible. We have been trying to measure time. The first clocks, long before balance wheels, long before mechanical watches, and long before quartz oscillators, human civilization still needed time. Farmers needed it, priests needed it, and kings needed it. And the first society to take time seriously enough to measure it properly was ancient Egypt. The Egyptian world, it ran in cycles. The Nile flooded every year. Fields had to be planted at exactly the right moment. Harvest had to arrive before the waters returned, so the Egyptians divided the day: 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night. 24 hours, not because the sun demanded it, but because agriculture demanded it. Time became a tool of survival, a tool by which civilizations could grow, and to track it the Egyptians built some of the earliest, most rudimentary clocks that humanity ever created. Water clocks, simple stone vessels filled with water. Tiny holes allowed the water to drip slowly out of them at a controlled rate. Inside the vessel, carefully carved markings showed the falling level, and as the water dropped, time revealed itself. No gears, no springs, just gravity and patience. But even these early clocks, they revealed a much deeper truth. They did not control time, they simply watched it pass. The next great timekeeper was the sun. Sundials appeared across the ancient world, a simple vertical rod casting a moving shadow across carved stone. Morning, noon, afternoon, time became visible, but it was still fragile. Clouds could hide it, night could erase it, which meant something deeply profound. For most of human history, time could only be measured for part of the day. Half the day belonged to clocks, the other half belonged to darkness. Then, in medieval Europe, something changed. Monasteries began building mechanical clocks, not for science, for prayer. Monks prayed at fixed intervals throughout the day and night. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers and compline. The clock tower was not an instrument of precision, it was an instrument of discipline. Time became daily structure. Villages organised life around the sound of bells, and suddenly time was no longer local, it was communal. The bell tower did not ask what time it was, it told you what time it was, and you obeyed. But the real transformation arrived centuries later, with trains. Before railways, every town kept its own local time. Noon was simply when the sun sat highest above that particular town, which meant every town ran at a slightly different time. 5 minutes here, 8 minutes there, it did not matter until trains arrived. Railways demanded something that the world had never required before: precise, synchronised time. A train leaving one city had to arrive at another city according to the same clock. Suddenly minutes mattered, schedules mattered, and precision mattered. And the solution was railway time. Central clocks synchronised across entire countries. Station clocks became the new authority, large, visible and reliable. If the railway clock said the train left at 9 o'clock, the train left at 9 o'clock. No negotiation, no interpretation, just time to depart. Pocket watches soon became part of that infrastructure. Railway workers were required to carry watches that met strict accuracy standards, regular inspections, synchronisation checks. A watch that drifted could cause catastrophe. And interestingly, some of the most accurate watches in the world at that time, they didn't come from Switzerland, they came from the interior of the United States of America. American railroad watches built by companies like Waltham, Elgin and Hamilton were engineered specifically for railway precision. Tough, legible, highly regulated watches. For many years, their accuracy standards actually ran well ahead of anything Swiss watchmaking could produce, and those companies became part of a wider American timekeeping industry that would eventually connect to General Time and the Westclocks Corporation. A company with a small personal connection in my own life. My mother worked for Westclocks and my aunt ran the Scottish factory office. A quiet reminder that the history of timekeeping, it's not only about the famous inventors or the luxury brands, it's also about the thousands of people who actually built the clocks and assembled the movements. And they kept the industry running. It is a fascinating and slightly forgotten chapter of horological history, one that deserves a full episode all of its own in the future of the channel. But the key point here, it remains simple. For the first time in human history, timekeeping was no longer philosophical, it was operational. Mechanical watches eventually brought that level of precision to the wrist, a tiny balance wheel oscillating back and forth hundreds and hundreds of times every minute, portable time, personal time. But mechanical watches were never perfect. Temperature changed them, gravity changed them, wearing them changed them. which is why quartz appeared in the 20th century, a vibrating crystal, a distilled product of Pierre Curie's piezoelectric reaction, oscillating thousands of times per second. Suddenly watches became astonishingly accurate, and then something even more extraordinary happened. Atomic clocks. Instead of gears or crystals, time was measured using the behaviour of atoms themselves, the oscillation of cesium atoms to be precise, billions of vibrations every single second, accuracy so precise the clock would barely drift over centuries. Which brings us to this watch, the Casio G-Shock GWM 5610U. At first glance, it looks almost humble, a digital square, simple, practical, but inside it carries something remarkable. It's not the solar cells. Every night while the wearer sleeps, this watch listens for a signal. It receives radio signals broadcast by atomic clocks, signals that contain the most precise time that humanity can currently produce. The watch does not guess, it does not drift, it synchronises quietly, automatically. And in my own collection, this watch, it's got a very specific job. This is my railway clock, the reference watch, the watch that sets every other watch that I own. Mechanical watches, quartz watches, vintage watches, every single one of them eventually gets aligned to this small square instrument, because every collector of mechanical timepieces should own something like this. A reference, a reminder that perfect time exists somewhere beyond the balance wheel. But Shakespeare understood something long before radio signals, long before quartz, long before atomic clocks. Even perfect timekeeping changes nothing. I am time's subject, not its master, not its owner, its subject. The Egyptians knew it. Their clocks could measure the hours, but they could not stop the Nile. The monks knew it. Their bells would organise the order of the day, but they could not extend life. The railway engineers, they knew it too. Their clocks could prevent collisions, but they could not slow down the earth. And atomic clocks, they know it too. They can measure time with unimaginable precision, but they cannot change what time does. Horology did not invent time, it simply built instruments to live beside it. Water clocks, sundials, bell towers and railway clocks, wristwatches, each one a small human attempt to understand something vastly larger than ourselves. And Shakespeare captured that truth in a single sentence: I am time's subject. Perhaps that's the final lesson for every watch collector out there. The watch on your wrist, it does not conquer time. It simply reminds you that you belong to it, and perhaps that is what Shakespeare understood all along. Time is not something that we control, it's something that we pass through, and in the end, every single clock ever built is simply humanity listening to its own footsteps. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. All these watches are wrong, not slightly wrong, not debatably wrong, fundamentally wrong. Rolex, Omega, Seiko, Panerai, 4 giants, 4 icons, 4 brands that people defend like they're beyond criticism, and yet every single one of them carries something you could point at and say that shouldn't exist. A distortion in the crystal, a resistance where there should be precision, an imperfection where alignment is expected, a story doing more work than the object itself. And if this were any other product, those would be failures. Welcome back to Horological. You would fix them, remove them, refine them out of existence. And collectors try, they zoom in, they measure, they debate, They chase something called perfection because we've all been taught the same thing, that better engineering leads to better objects, that fewer flaws means higher quality, that perfection is the goal. But there's a problem with that, because if you actually removed those flaws, if you corrected them, if you made these watches objectively better, they wouldn't become better at all. They would become unrecognisable. And that's the part nobody wants to admit. So the question isn't, why do these problems exist? The real question is this: why do they have to? Because today we're not looking at what these brands got wrong, we're looking at why they couldn't afford to get it right. Watch collecting is obsessed with perfection, perfect finishing, perfect symmetry, perfect alignment, perfect engineering. Scroll any forum and you'll see watches judged under magnification levels that no human being ever experiences in real life. Fractions of a millimetre, microscopic tolerances, small deltas, invisible inconsistencies turned into major flaws. Because the internet has changed how we see objects. We no longer experience watches at arm's length, we experience them at 400% zoom. And at that level, everything breaks down, but watches were never designed to exist there in that space. They are not theoretical objects, they are industrial objects. They are built in factories, by machines, by people, under constraint. And every single watch, no matter what the brand is the result of trade-offs, engineering trade-offs, cost trade-offs, manufacturing trade-offs, and design trade-offs. Every decision solves one problem, but it also creates another. So perfection isn't real. And every single watch, no matter what the brand is the result of trade-offs. Engineering trade-offs, cost trade-offs, manufacturing trade-offs, and design trade-offs. Every single decision solves one problem, but it also creates another. So perfection isn't real. What actually exists is prioritisation, and the brands that we consider great aren't the ones that eliminated flaws, they're the ones that chose their flaws very carefully. Let's start with Rolex, the most recognisable watch brand on the face of the earth, and also the creator of one of the most controversial design features ever made, the Cyclops, that magnified bubble on the crystal with the little bit of AR underneath it, distorting the visual, breaking symmetry, interrupting what would otherwise be a clean surface. From a design perspective, it is easy to criticise. It disrupts balance, it adds visual weight, and it pulls your eye away from the dial. And many collectors prefer the purity of a flat crystal. And objectively, they're not wrong, but Rolex was never chasing purity. Rolex was chasing recognition. Across a room, across a table, or across a crowded space, that one optical distortion, it does something extraordinary. It identifies the watch immediately. No logo required. The Cyclops is not a magnifier. It is a signal. It is a brand compressed into a single detail. And here's the uncomfortable part. Remove it and the watch improves. Cleaner, more symmetrical, more refined, but also less identifiable, less immediate, less Rolex. The flaw is actually the fingerprint of the watch. Now let's look at Omega. On paper, this is where things should fall apart, because Omega does almost everything right. Master chronometer movements, anti-magnetic engineering, exceptional tolerances. Technically, this should be as close to perfect as modern watchmaking can get. And yet there's a detail collectors keep coming back to time and time again. The bezel. Not how it looks, but how it feels. Too tight, not in a reassuring way, in a resistant way. You don't glide into position, you push into it. And then something worse, a slight bit of backplay, that tiny moment where the bezel settles backwards after the click. It's subtle, but once you feel it, you can't unfeel it, because on a dive watch, the bezel is everything. It is the most interacted with component on the entire watch. It's supposed to feel absolute, precise, final, and Omega's doesn't always feel like that. So what happened? Because this isn't a brand that can't engineer a perfect bezel. They absolutely can, which means that this is a choice. Omega isn't building pure tool watches anymore. They're building something else. Luxury instruments. Objects that have to feel refined, even when they're supposed to feel functional. So the bezel becomes tighter, more controlled, less mechanical aggression, more damped resistance, and in doing that, something shifts. It stops feeling like equipment and it starts feeling like a finished object. For some collectors, that's a massive downgrade. For others, that's exactly the point, because Omega didn't get the bezel wrong. They changed what the watch is supposed to be, and that's the pattern, not failure, reprioritisation. Now we arrive at Seiko, one of the most important watch companies ever to exist. A brand that didn't just participate in watchmaking, it changed it forever. And yet there's a criticism that never goes away. Alignment, bezel slightly off, chapter rings not perfectly centred, tiny inconsistencies, not dramatic but visible. If you go looking for it, you'll see it. And today, everyone goes looking because cameras zoom further, screens get sharper, expectations get higher. But here's what the criticism ignores: scale. Seiko builds watches for the world, mechanical watches, automatic watches, divers, chronographs, accessible and available. To do that, something has to give, because perfect cosmetic precision at that scale, it requires slower production, higher rejection rates, more waste, higher cost. So Seiko made a decision. More people owning mechanical watches matters more than microscopic perfection. And that decision bulk collectors and bulk collections, because for many people, Seiko wasn't their second watch. It was their first. That slight imperfection, it's not a mistake, it is access. And finally, Panerai, a brand that you don't discover, you notice across a room, across a table, across a wrist, before you've even processed what it actually is. Huge case, minimal dial, that crown guard locking the whole silhouette together. And yet the criticism is familiar, not subtle, not technical, but practical. 50 metres of water resistance on some of the most wearable models. On paper, that makes absolutely no sense. A brand that was built in military dive history, producing watches that technically you couldn't trust anywhere near that environment. And no amount of storytelling changes that fact. Heritage doesn't increase water resistance. Narrative doesn't seal a case. So what is actually going on? Because again, this isn't a brand that cannot build deep-rated watches. They absolutely can, and they can do it well, which means this was a choice. Panerai isn't building equipment anymore. Not really. Panerai builds identity objects, watches that don't ask to be analysed, they ask to be recognised. The size, the shape, the presence. They don't disappear on wrist, they define the wrist, and once you understand that, the specification, it starts to make some little bit of sense, because Panerai isn't selling capability. It's selling certainty. Certainty that when someone sees it, they'll know exactly what it is. Remove the size, remove the presence, chase perfect specifications, and something breaks. It stops being a Panerai because the product isn't just the watch, it's the silhouette, the stance, the statement it makes, and that doesn't come from depth ratings, it comes from presence, and the presence still exists. Watch collecting tells you to chase perfection, perfect finishing, perfect symmetry, perfect execution, but perfection is forgettable because perfection removes friction, and friction is what creates identity. The Cyclops, the Omega bezel, Seiko's alignment, and Panerai's presence. Each one criticised, each one debated, each one called a flaw, and each one instantly recognisable. Remove them and something strange happens. Rolex becomes generic, Omega becomes neutral, Seiko becomes inaccessible, and Panerai becomes invisible. Because in watchmaking, the flaw is not the mistake, it is the decision that survived. It's the point where engineering stopped and identity began. And the thing collectors complain about the most is often the exact reason that the watch exists at all. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Oh, why do I love flawed watches so much? 6 months, no corrections, no interventions, no tidying the result up halfway through because reality suddenly became inconvenient. And by the end of this test, I was left with 2 very different conclusions. One about this watch and one about quartz accuracy itself. Welcome back to Horological. In a previous video, I said there is a point in watch collecting where accuracy stops being impressive and starts to become invisible. Most people don't realise when they've crossed it. I floated that idea back then. I stand by it even more now because this time I've spent 6 months testing a different Bulova. And this one pushes the argument even further, not in theory, not on a spec sheet, but in real lived ownership experience. Now this is not a lab test, it's not a catalogue war of specification escalation, and it is not one of those videos where someone reads a rated tolerance off of a website and then pretends they've lived with it and discovered something profound. This is a long-term, real-world ownership test. A watch that's in rotation, a watch on the wrist, a watch with the crown that's been left alone. And before I even show you the results of this test, I need to establish something more important than the result itself. The railway reference clock, if you will, because if the benchmark is weak, the whole system collapses, and if the benchmark is strong, then what follows starts to resonate at a much deeper level. The control watch used here is the Casio GWM 5610U 1ER. It's a multi-band 6 G-Shock, and that matters because the module on its own is rated at plus or minus 15 seconds per month. But in this context, that figure is almost beside the point because in real world use, this watch is not simply relying on its internal module rating. It synchronises, it receives a broadcast atomic clock signal. In this particular example, it seems to do that at around like 3 AM in the morning, and that means when it has successfully received that signal, it is effectively being pulled back into line with atomic time on a daily basis. So while no practical watch is literally frozen in time forever, the important point is this: if it's synced overnight, then in real terms, it cannot really be out of alignment with that atomic reference by more than about half a second over the following day. Time is not out of joint here, Hamlet, and that is the key technical foundation of this whole video. Not that the Casio is inherently accurate on its own, but that successful nightly synchronisation makes it almost disappear as a variable. And this is where one tiny detail becomes incredibly important. During the B-roll, if you look in the top left corner of that LCD display, you'll see the letters RCVD. That means the watch has successfully received the multi-band 6 atomic clock signal within the last 24 hours. And that is proof of validity. No RCVD, no trustworthy benchmark. RCVD on the screen, benchmark valid. It is that simple. That little received marker is what allows the 5610U to function here as a proper long-term reference, rather than just another quartz watch with a decent reputation. And I wanted to get that out of the way early, because otherwise the rest of this risks sounding like enthusiasm dressed up as method acting, and it certainly isn't. And in fact, this reference has now become the centre of a much larger test. Because one useful thing for us happened this year on Sunday the 29th of March at 2 AM in the morning. British summertime began. Now for most people, that's just the point in the year where a few clocks change and everyone gets annoyed for a day. But in this context, it created a very useful opportunity. The Casio automatically moved between Greenwich Mean Time and British summertime at the appropriate next received atomic signal. The isolated Bulovas, of course, they did not, and that mattered because I deliberately chose not to hack them and change the time on them. I didn't want to disturb the long-term tracking just to make them visually match the Casio for this video. So from that point onward, both Bulova watches remained 1 hour behind the 5610U, deliberately. Not because the test had gone wrong, because I refused to contaminate the integrity of it for aesthetics, but I also took advantage of that same period to set up something else, something a little bigger. On the 7th of April 2026, when I finally found time to get it done, oh the irony, I synchronised the rest of my quartz collection to the time displayed in the 5610U. Everything except for these two Bulova pieces, because those two were already deep into the isolation of their own long-term tests. So there's now another benchmark running in the background, a much larger version of a proven concept. A 1 month test that for the 5 top contenders will become a 6 month test. The Hunger Games for watches, if you'll allow me. A larger spread of Casio and other quartz watches, all head to head in an eventual winner-takes-all contest, and all referenced against atomic time via the 5610U. And again, the rule is simple. If that RCVD marker is on the screen, the benchmark is valid. I'll ideally film those 1 month watch results on the 7th of May, or as close after it as I can fit into my schedule. We can return to the 6 month test with the top 5 quartz watches from the 1 month experiment in October. That will probably be around about the 25th, as here in the UK, British summertime ends and we return to Greenwich Mean Time. A broader quartz snapshot across a few segments of the hobby. Now that'll make a fantastic YouTube playlist when that's complete, but today's watch is not the Casio and it is not the larger collection, it is this, the Bulova Lunar Pilot. Let's look at a quick spec slide of this watch. The case material is 316L stainless steel. Case diameter 45mm. Thickness 13.5mm. The lug width, 20mm. The lug to lug, 52mm. The movement, it's a high frequency quartz NP20 running at 262 kHz. The crystal, it's sapphire with AR inside only. The water resistance is 50 metres, and the weight on the OEM leather strap is 115 grams. For 6 months, I have left it alone. No hacking, no mid-test corrections, no stepping in because the result was drifting towards a less flattering headline. It has simply lived as an owned watch, worn in rotation, handled normally. It's even had a couple of strap changes in that time. Then it's been put in the wrist and taken off again, allowed to exist within the real environment that owned watches actually inhabit. And that matters because accuracy that only exists in pristine laboratory conditions, that tells you something about the engineering, but accuracy that survives ordinary ownership experience, that tells you something about the actual watch itself. And those are not the same thing, not even close. Now, after the last video, a couple of people in the comments said the result was probably down to the watches being kept in a temperature stable environment. And that is not an unreasonable point to make. Quartz behaviour, it absolutely can be dramatically affected by temperature. So I checked the building thermostat and the delta for that area, it is around 10 degrees Celsius, meaning roughly plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius off the baseline of 20 degrees. Now I'll accept that is reasonably stable, but I will push back on the stronger version of that argument because these watches have not been sealed away, untouched in some static, hermetically sealed control box. They've lived in the current daily rotation box. They have both seen a fair amount of wrist time. My community posts on YouTube alone show that. And I do actually enjoy wearing them. So yes, this is a normal ownership environment. Okay, well, yes, normal for us collector types, but that to me is exactly why the result matters, because that is how watches like this are actually used, not under clean laboratory extremes, not in a climate controlled chamber, but on rotation in real life. So I maintain that this reflects a real world usage case of these watches. And if someone's counter argument is essentially that the watches perform too well because they were treated like normal watches in a normal ownership setting, then that's fine. I'm quite happy to live with that. There is also a second thread running through this video because the other Bulova from the previous test, it hasn't stopped. The Marine Star Precisionist has now reached almost the 8-month point, and there has been a slight change there. In the earlier phase, it was sitting effectively dead even. Now at close to 8 months, it has lost against atomic time, and frankly, that is still a ridiculous result. Not pretty good, not that's done well, not good for a quartz watch, ridiculous, full stop. Especially when you remember that these watches, they're not radio controlled, they're not receiving atomic time signals overnight, they are standing on their own internal stability. And that is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for the more expensive players in our hobby. Because Grand Seiko's newer UFA designation, it literally stands for ultra fine accuracy. And the calibre 9RB2, it is rated at plus or minus 20 seconds per year. Grand Seiko says it achieves that through a carefully controlled package of technical innovations. A 3-month aged quartz oscillator crystal, a new temperature compensating IC, individual thermal compensation data points measured at several temperatures after casing, and a system that samples temperature 540 times a day inside a vacuum sealed package. Now that's a reasonable polling rate for such a system. They also added a regulation switch to correct long-term divergence during service. I'll say that again, long-term divergence. They are expecting it to require regulation to maintain accuracy. Now that is serious watchmaking, serious engineering solutions implementation, properly serious. That is not marketing BS. That is a premium manufacturer throwing real technical sophistication at the problem of long-term stability, a problem that Bulova and the parent company Citizen Group appears to have solved at a much more accessible price point. When I say that these two Bulova precisionist movements are putting Grand Seiko's newer UFA figures firmly in the shade in these observed real-world tests, I'm not saying Bulova has suddenly invalidated the entire premium high-accuracy quartz conversation, but what I am saying is something narrower and in a way more compelling. I am saying that in lived ownership terms, these Bulova are posting numbers so strong that the prestige hierarchy, it starts to wobble on its pedestal. Because once you're in a zone where one watch is out in 6 months and another is out in almost 8 months, you're no longer having a normal quartz conversation. You're in the territory where practical experience starts embarrassing expectation. And to me, that is fascinating. Now, all of that brings me back to the original point. Accuracy is not really a ladder. People will talk about it like it is, as if every gain in precision is equally meaningful, as if there is a straight line from less accurate to more satisfying, but there isn't. Accuracy is a stable threshold up to a certain point. More accuracy changes the ownership experience. Beyond that point, the ownership experience barely changes at all. And that threshold, it arrives much sooner than people think. That is the real argument of this channel's recent quartz work. Not that numbers don't matter. They absolutely do, but they matter the most right up until the moment they stop changing how the watch feels to own. And once you cross that point, the story changes. Then it becomes about design, ease of use, legibility, confidence, history, intent, and wrist presence. There's also enjoyment in there too. Everything technical that matters has already gone quiet. Which is exactly why this reveal matters, not because the number is dramatically big, but because the number pushes the watch well over that threshold, both watches well over that threshold. So, after 6 months running against the Casio GWM 5610U 1ER, benchmarked to atomic time, with the RCVD marker used as the validity check, the Bulova Lunar Pilot 45mm has gained 4 seconds. That's total, that's not 4 seconds per month, 4 seconds in 6 months. And the Marine Star, now at almost 8 months, has lost 2 seconds against the same atomic reference. And that is the real conclusion, not merely that these Bulova watches are accurate, but they are so accurate in ordinary ownership circumstances that accuracy itself, it starts to disappear from the owner's experience. That was the argument in the previous video. This result does not weaken it, it confirms it, sharpens it, unequivocally, because once a watch becomes accurate enough that you stop checking it, that you stop worrying about it and stop having to manage it, the problem has already been fully resolved. Everything beyond that becomes engineering expression, and I love engineering expression, I really do. That is why watches are interesting, but there is something quietly brilliant about a watch that solves the problem of timekeeping so well that it gives the experience back to you. That is what these Bulovas are doing, and it is also why the upcoming larger quartz benchmark really matters. Because if that broader collection test shows the same pattern, then this stops being a story about one or two unusually strong watches. It becomes a bigger story about where modern quartz really sits in the lived hierarchy of timepiece ownership. And a huge thank you as always to the channel members. Your ongoing support is really appreciated, and if you want to see that full 1 month quartz benchmark filmed around about the 7th of May, then a 6 months accuracy reveal in October, click subscribe now so you don't miss it. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Oh, 2 hours setting quartz watches for a test. Oh. This is not an advert, this is a message. Rolex have released this 1 week before Watches and Wonders. Just a sequence of images that apparently don't explain themselves. But the more that you watch it, the less it feels like marketing, and the more it feels like they're trying to tell you something important. There is a massive hidden secret message in this 16-second clip. Let's break it down together. Welcome back to Horological. This is where it starts, not with a watch, with a case, flat, closed, complete, but only on the surface, because almost immediately it comes apart. Not violently, not dramatically, precisely layer by layer. The crystal lifts, the fluted bezel separates, the crown disengages. Everything that defines the exterior reveals itself as a component. And this is important because Rolex aren't just showing you a case, they're showing you case construction, they're showing you that what looks singular is actually engineered, deliberate, controlled. Every ridge, every seal, every interface between the metal and air, it exists for a reason. Water resistance, pressure tolerance, isolation. This is the boundary between the world and whatever lives inside it. But here's the detail that most people will miss. There is still no watch, no dial, no hands, no movement, just structure, just the architecture of protection. And then the perspective shifts. We move above it, top down, looking directly into the space where everything should be. And instead of a reveal, we get a title. Rolex presents, not introduces, not unveils, presents, which tells you that this isn't a product launch, it is a narrative being established. Because Rolex don't open with the watch, they open with the idea that something is about to be shown on their terms. And then finally, a watch appears. But it's not the watch you expect. It's not a dive watch, it's not a GMT, it's not a Daytona, it's not a sports model built for impact. This is something else entirely. Roman numerals, a small second subdial, a guilloche style dial that pulls your eye inward, and those hands, Breguet style, slim, tapered, with that unmistakable circular eye near the tip. A design language that predates Rolex entirely, which tells you something important. This isn't about modern identity, this is about inheritance. And printed at the centre, Rolex Oyster. Not just a name, a statement, because Oyster isn't about design, it is about invention. The first truly water-resistant watch case. The moment Rolex stopped making watches that told time and started making watches that could survive it. And that connects directly back to what we just saw. The case, the separation, the protection, because this watch is the reason that case exists. But look closer. This isn't modern Rolex. This is restrained, almost classical. It doesn't shout, it doesn't dominate, it sits quietly as if it belongs to a different era entirely. And that's deliberate because Rolex aren't showing you where they are, they're showing you where they got started. This is origin, this is identity, this is the foundation that everything else is built upon. Before the tool watches, before the professional range, before the mythology. And the message is simple. Before Rolex became the benchmark, they had to solve a problem. How do you protect time from the world around it? It almost feels appropriate to be filming this while wearing the Tudor 1926 moon phase. It's in its own oyster case with historical dress looks combined with modern capability, because last year Rolex quietly filed patents for a new annual calendar architecture, one that strongly points towards a moon phase return. We'll visit this properly in a future video. Then what looks abstract suddenly becomes precision. This isn't random imagery, this is Mercedes glights. In this moment, it isn't accidental, because 1 year earlier, 1926, Rolex introduced the oyster case, a sealed system, a claim. But a claim means nothing until it's been proven, and Hans Wilsdorf knew that. So in 1927, he didn't take the watch to a lab, he took it to the English Channel. 15 hours, freezing water, jellyfish stings, total exposure, and instead of being wrist worn, it was suspended around her neck, fully submerged, fully tested and not protected, not shielded from the elements, just the case and a swimmer against the world. Both of them made it through the ordeal. The swimmer survived, and the watch didn't let the English Channel with its highly destructive salt water inside. And that moment changes everything, because this wasn't marketing, it was evidence. The case that we saw being constructed was now a proven case in the harshest environment available at the time. And suddenly this sequence makes sense, because Rolex aren't showing you history for nostalgic reasons. They're showing you origin as validation, from invention to proof of concept, from idea to trust. And then we leave the water and we go higher, not just into the air, but to the edge of possibility. This aircraft, registration Gamma-Alpha Charlie Alpha Zulu, it is a Westland PV3, part of the early 1930s Everest expeditions. The pilot, Douglas Hamilton, Lord Clydesdale, the date April the 3rd, 1933, a high-altitude experimental flight where aviation wasn't just difficult, it was pushed into environments it wasn't ready for. Extreme cold, low oxygen, unstable air, pressure conditions that challenge both the machine and the human. This is exploration at its limit, and in that environment, time matters differently, not as a convenience, but as a constant, because when everything else becomes uncertain, time is the only reference that doesn't move. And this is where Rolex extend the idea, because proving the oyster case in water, that was survival. But here, this is exposure of a completely different kind. Altitude instead of depth, pressure instead of immersion, cold instead of corrosion. Different conditions, but the same question. Can time remain stable when the environment isn't? This flight wasn't timed by Longines, but it didn't need to be, because what you're looking at here is the exact kind of flight that forced aviation to standardise time in the first place. And decades later, that system gets a name and a watch: Zulu time, and now the pattern is undeniable. Water, air, two extremes, two validations, not theoretical, proven, because Rolex aren't building a story, they're building a record. And then we come back down to earth, but not to safety, to speed. This is Sir Malcolm Campbell, Daytona Beach, 276.82 miles per hour. A number that at the time sits right at the edge of control, because at this level, speed isn't smooth. Hoyer were the leaders in motorsport timing years before the TAG Association began. Now, TAG Heuer are the main timing sponsor of Formula One, and like Campbell's speed records, there are many direct synergies. Engines pushed to failure, surfaces that are barely stable, margins reduced to nothing, and time precision measured in fractions of a second. Because when you're moving this fast, everything compresses. Distance, reaction, decision making, all reduced to seconds. And those seconds, they have to be trusted. Absolutely. And that's why this moment sits here, because Rolex aren't repeating themselves, they are escalating. Water was survival, air was exposure. Speed is pressure, different environments, different demands, same underlying question. Can time still be trusted when everything else around it is pushed beyond its limits? And the answer isn't being stated, it's being demonstrated. And then we go higher again, but this time it's not machinery, it's human. This is Sir Edmund Hillary. Now, was it a Rolex Explorer, or was it a Smith's watch at the 8,848 metre summit of Everest on the 29th of May 1953, the highest point on Earth, where the environment isn't just hostile, it is uninhabitable, low oxygen, extreme cold, total exposure, a place where survival itself becomes uncertain, and time once again changes meaning. Not speed, not endurance, survival measured in moments. Because at altitude like this, every second matters, every decision carries weight. And then the image moves and we see something else, a different climber from a different era. This is not Tenzing Norgay, this is Junko Tabei. And this is where it gets really interesting, because she wasn't associated with Rolex. She was backed by Seiko on the first female ascent of Everest on the 16th of May 1975. And that matters because for the first time, Rolex aren't just showing achievement, they're showing achievement that isn't exclusively theirs. Which tells you this isn't a pure product narrative, it is a category narrative, because Everest doesn't belong to one brand. The achievement stands on its own, and time, the measurement of that achievement, exists regardless of who makes the watch and measures it. And that's the subtle shift from ownership to authority, because Rolex aren't claiming these moments, but they're placing themselves alongside them as part of a wider story, a history of human beings pushing into environments where time becomes critical. And it's deliberate, because when you acknowledge the wider field, you don't weaken your position, you elevate it. You move from competitor to fixed reference point, and now the pattern evolves again. Water, air, speed, altitude. Not just different environments, but different eras. Different people, different watches, same underlying truth. Time is the constant, time is the anchor. And then we go the other way, not up, but down, far beyond anything we've seen so far. This is the Bathyscaphe Trieste, the 23rd of January 1960, crewed by Jacques Picard and Don Walsh, descending the Mariana Trench, the deepest point on planet Earth, 10,916 metres below the surface, a place where the environment, it isn't just hostile, It's crushing, literally crushing, total darkness, near freezing temperatures, pressure so extreme it would destroy anything built for the surface. And just like before, this isn't random, because once again, time has been taken somewhere it shouldn't survive. But this moment carries something else, something far more subtle, because the name Bathyscaphe, it's not Rolex. That name belongs to Blancpain, a quiet nod to another brand, another adjacent lineage, another claim to underwater history, and Rolex added it in. They acknowledged it, because at this level, this isn't about ownership, it's about the environment itself. And Rolex were there too, because attached to the outside of this vessel, on that descent, was a Rolex, not a Blancpain, the deep sea special, not protected, not sealed inside, but exposed directly to the pressure. And it survived, just like the swimmer, just like the aircraft, and just like the land speed record. Different environment, same question. Can time exist where nothing else should? And now the scale, it expands again, from the highest point to the lowest, from Everest to the Mariana Trench. Not competing, not comparing, but present, because time exists everywhere, and the watches that measure it have to follow, and then it stops. No environment, no motion, no test, just a line. 100 years of achievement. Not a claim, a summary, because everything that we've just seen wasn't randomly selected. It was a timeline from 1926 to the deepest point on Earth in 1960. Not mere moments in time, but real milestones. And Rolex don't explain it. They don't need to. They let the history do the talking. And then we choose to go to the moon. We leave the planet, the Saturn V rocket in motion briefly, the moment humanity stops testing environments and starts leaving them behind. Because space isn't hostile, it is absolute. No air, no pressure, no margin for error, and time becomes critical in its purest portable form for the time. Piezoelectric quartz oscillation, not for survival, not for speed, but for highly accurate coordination and navigation, because missions like this cannot happen without it. And this is where the story widens again, because this moment, it doesn't belong to one watch brand. Officially, it's Omega, the Omega Speedmaster, tested, certified, issued, but unofficially, Rolex was there too. GMTs worn by astronauts, personal choices, quietly present, and then beyond that, other names enter the frame. William Pogue with Seiko, David Scott with Bulova. Different watches, different origins, but the same environment, because space doesn't care what you wear, only that it works. And then there's something deeper still, something you don't see on the wrist, because behind the astronauts, behind the watches, there were systems, quartz timing systems, built into the mission's main motherboard itself. From Apollo 8 onwards, elements of that infrastructure came from General Time, through Westclocks, Bulova and Grumman. Not in the spotlight, intentionally, but part of what made it possible. And if you want the full breakdown of that, I've already covered it in detail in a previous video. Because at this level, time isn't worn, it's engineered, integrated, made fail-safe and relied upon across every subsequent Apollo mission. And then after everything, we return to the watch. Not the case, not the dial, the movement this time. And this isn't heritage, this is modern Rolex. A calibre from the 3200 family, not identified, not labelled, because it doesn't need to be. What matters is what it represents, because everything we've just seen, water, air, speed, altitude, depth, space, none of it exists without this unseen layer, the part that isn't photographed in history books, but is present in every single moment, because cases protect, dials display, But movements keep time, and this is where Rolex bring it back under control, because after showing you a century of testing environments, they remind you of one thing: all of it depends on this: precision, consistency, reliability, not in one moment, but across all of them, because this isn't about where the watch has been, it's about what allows it to go there in the first place. Then we come back, but not to history, not to extremes, to the watch, a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, clean, finished, complete, no environment around it now, no water, no altitude, no speed, no depth, just the object itself. And for a moment it feels simple, almost quiet, but that silence is intentional, because now we move inside a clean room, controlled, precise, clinical, where the watch isn't an icon yet, it is a component being handled, assembled, verified. This is where the abstraction becomes real, where everything we've seen gets reduced to process. And then finally, hands, gloved, careful, holding the case, not as a finished product, but as a single component, something that has passed through every challenge: water, air, speed, depth, space, and survived. And that's the point, because Rolex don't start with engineering and then add meaning later. They start with intent and build engineering to match it. Every environment we saw was just the test. This is the result. It doesn't end, it expands, because this isn't a conclusion, it is a continuation, a loop that doesn't close, because Rolex aren't telling you what they've done, they're telling you what they're still doing and counting. We move from imagery and symbolism into rapid fire horology now, a sequence of Rolex references that don't feel random but carefully curated, almost like a coded catalogue of identity reflection. So let's go through them. Each watch appears briefly, but nothing about this feels accidental. The first watch is the Rolex Skydweller, ever rose gold with the blue dial, a dual-time annual calendar watch built to manage multiple time zones in one highly engineered precious metal package. Then it's the Cosmograph Daytona Rainbow, a high jewellery chronograph in precious metal with a full gradient sapphire bezel and a diamond set dial. It shifts the sequence from pure timing instrument into outright spectacle, performance engineering turned into colour-coded status display. The next watch is the Oyster Perpetual Celebration Dial, a stainless steel time-only model with a turquoise base dial covered in multicoloured bubble motifs. It strips complications away completely and replaces them with pure visual expression. No calendar, no GMT, no chronograph, just time presented as colour, repetition and design language. In the sequence, it acts as a reset point. After spectacle and complexity, Rolex pulls everything back to simplicity and surface emotion. We quickly move on to the Oyster Perpetual, stainless steel, smooth bezel and a turquoise Tiffany style dial with simple baton markers. It is the purest expression in the lineup. No date, no complication, no framing device beyond colour and proportion. The celebration has been removed, wiped clean. In this sequence it functions as contrast. After gem set spectacle and complex chronographs, a colourful celebration dial, Rolex reduces everything back to a single idea. Time is clarity, not performance. Then we get the Datejust, two-tone steel and yellow gold with a green dial and Roman numeral hour markers. This is the archetypal Rolex design language, Cyclops date window and instantly recognisable proportions. Within this sequence it represents identity and tradition, the point where Rolex stops experimenting and returns to its most established visual code. Next up is the Datejust, silver dial with yellow gold fluted bezel and two-tone bracelet. This version strips back the colour and pushes the watch into its most classical form, restrained, symmetrical and unmistakably traditional Rolex. In the sequence, it acts as a stabilising anchor. After colour experiments and modern variations, this is Rolex returning to pure heritage design language. Then we get very briefly one frame, the Day-Day yellow gold case and presidential bracelet with a deep green dial and Day-Day display at 12 o'clock. This is Rolex at its most institutional, full precious metal, full calendar identity and the unmistakable president configuration that signals authority rather than utility. In the sequence, it functions as escalation, moving from design language into symbolism of power, where time is no longer just measured, but represented as status. We're now halfway through this very quick sequence where I had to go frame by frame to capture these screenshots. Some watches literally had only one frame, some had up to 3 and a couple had 2 frames. Next up is the Day-Day yellow gold president bracelet with a rich green dial, diamond set hour markers and a full weekday display at 12 o'clock. This is the most overtly prestigious expression of the Day-Day line, combining precious materials with ornamental detail and immediate legibility of status. In the sequence, it reinforces the idea of authority becoming visual language. Time displayed not just through function, but through symbolism, wealth and recognition at a glance. The next watch is the Day-Day Ever Rose gold case and a presidential bracelet with a warm amber orange sunburst dial. Diamond set bezel, this is where the tone shifts from prestige into pure visual heat. The diamond bezel pushes it beyond tool watch logic into curated identity, where the watch becomes less about telling time and more about declaring presence. This variation amplifies Rolex's use of material and colour psychology. The Ever Rose gold softens the form, while the diamond bezel adds an almost ceremonial edge, suggesting celebration, status and visibility rather than discretion. In the rapid sequence, it reads like escalation, then on to the immediate calm of the Oyster Perpetual. Stainless steel case and Oyster bracelet with a soft pastel green dial and minimal no date layout. This is the reset point. After the gold and the diamonds, Rolex pulls everything back into silence. The simplicity is the message. No complications, no framing device like a date window, no added hierarchy, just pure dial colour and proportion. In the rapid fire sequence, it reads like restraint, a reminder that Rolex identity doesn't rely on complexity, but control. This is where the teaser stops signalling status and it starts to signal design purity. Rolex then choose to show us another Datejust, stainless steel, oyster case and bracelet with a deep sunburst dial and classic date window at 3 o'clock with Cyclops magnification. This is where Rolex reintroduces structure the moment precision becomes visible again. The Datejust sits at the centre of Rolex identity. Everyday luxury with a functional complication. The dial adds modern recognition. But the real message is hierarchy, dial, date, magnifier, all working as a controlled visual system. In this rapid sequence, it feels like a return to order after the stripped back Oyster Perpetual. This watch re-establishes the idea that Rolex isn't just about restraint or excess. It can be about the balance between both of them at the same time. Then Day-Day again, stainless steel case this time with fluted bezel and presidential bracelet, paired with a deep sunburst blue dial. day display at 12 o'clock and date at 3 o'clock with Cyclops lens. This is the shift from utility into authority, where the day date stops being a watch and becomes a statement of control. This day date is Rolex's executive archetype. The full day window at 12 o'clock reinforces dominance and clarity, while the fluted bezel and polished steel surfaces amplify presence through light play rather than complication. In this rapid fire sequence, it signals escalation again, from restrained dangerous logic into overt leadership symbolism. This piece is less about telling the time and more about declaring status in the cleanest possible language Rolex has ever built. Another quick flash of a day date. Ever rose gold case and presidential bracelet paired with a silver sunburst dial, fluted bezel, Roman numerals, the full day display at 12 o'clock. This is Rolex doubling back in itself, same language of power but spoken in a quieter tone. Unlike the warmer amber variant, this version strips back emotional intensity while keeping full executive coding intact. The silver dial softens the presence, making it less statement of wealth and more institutional calm. The day date complication remains the anchor, the day at 12 and the date at 3, reinforcing structure over spectacle. This is controlled authority rather than celebration. The same watch, but a different personality depending on light, tone and intent. The penultimate watch in this amazing sequence is the Land Dweller, stainless steel integrated style case and bracelet with a white honeycomb textured dial, clean batten indices and a minimalist high clarity layout. This is where Rolex breaks its own language and it builds something new from the silence. The honeycomb dial immediately signals a shift away from traditional Rolex coding. It feels technical, almost architectural, stripping away ornament in favour of surface structure and texture. The Land Dweller name, it reinforces that pivot, less about luxury hierarchy and more about grounded engineered identity. In this rapid sequence, it reads like a reset after that day-day authority cycle. This watch suggests that Rolex is testing a different future, less ceremonial, more systems-based design thinking. Then finally we get the Land Dweller Ever Rose Gold with a white honeycomb dial, diamond set bezel and minimalist batten markers with a date window at 3 o'clock. This is where the experiment becomes luxury again, the same new language but translated into status. The honeycomb dial remains the structural identity, but with the addition of Ever Rose Gold and a diamond bezel, it shifts the watch back into high jewellery territory. It sits in tension. Technically it's a new direction, but visually it's firmly classic Rolex elevation. The Land Dweller idea is still present, but now filtered through prestige materials rather than restraint. This version suggests Rolex testing whether a new design system can still carry traditional luxury signals without losing immediate recognition. This sequence wasn't just a catalogue of watches, it behaves like a controlled identity map. Rolex appears to be compressing its entire design universe into a rapid visual argument about what it actually is. At surface level, we move through complication, spectacle, simplicity, tradition, authority, experimentation. But underneath, there's a repeating structural pattern: escalation of status, then deliberate collapse, precious metal and diamond heavy pieces, rainbow, gem set, day date. They represent overt status and visibility. These are immediately counterbalanced by stripped back Oyster Perpetual models. Rolex is not just showing luxury, it is showing the full emotional range of luxury, then removing it. Constant oscillation between signal and silence. Date just and day date act as signal anchors, structure authority, recognition. The Oyster Perpetual acts as silence anchors, minimalism, absence of complication. The sequence repeatedly resets itself, almost like Rolex is stress testing its own identity language. There is a colour and emotional coding system. Blue equals control and precision, the Sky Dweller day date. Green equals Rolex identity and recognition, the Date Just and Oyster Perpetual variants. Rainbow and gem tones, they represent spectacle and distortion of function into display. White and silver mean neutrality, reset and institutional calm in this context. This isn't aesthetic variety, it reads like a coded emotional spectrum of Rolex ownership. Function slowly dissolves into symbolism. Sky Dweller, this is real mechanical complexity, time zones, calendar logic and bezel mechanics. The Date Just, this is structured utility, date and clarity. Day-date watches represent authority detached from necessity. The weekday is power display. With the rainbow and gem set pieces, function almost disappears entirely. By the midpoint, Rolex is no longer describing timekeeping, it is describing hierarchy expressed as design language. Finally, the Land Dweller is a disruptor. Everything before it is recognisably Rolex coded. The Land Dweller breaks that visual grammar. Honeycomb dial, integrated bracelet feel, architectural texture layers. It reads like a prototype of a future language not fully formed yet, but the ever rose gold and diamond version immediately pulls it straight back into luxury again, suggesting Rolex cannot fully escape its own prestige identity. Rolex are toying with us here. The rapid fire sequence, it's not random product placement. It behaves like a compressed identity thesis. Rolex is showing that it can move freely between tool watch, jewellery, symbolism and systemisation, but it always returns to controlled prestige. The hidden message here is tension. Tension between restraint and excess, tension between function and symbolism, and extreme tension between innovation and recognisable identity. And the most important implication, Rolex is not presenting watches, it is presenting different states of what Rolex is allowed to be and how quickly it can switch between them without losing coherence. This is a massive flex and it should not be underestimated. Whatever is coming on April the 14th at Watches and Wonders is going to be massive. The new watch, 100 years. We don't get a name, we don't get a reference, we just get a fragment of language. 100 years stamped at the bottom edge of the dial where the Swiss crown made should be. Could this be every watch with an Oyster adjacent case can be ordered with a 100-year special dial? What we're actually looking at here, the macro texture still feels modern Rolex, brushed grey surface, high precision finishing, engineered indices. Gold framing suggests continuity with day-date, date-just lineage. Authority language is still present, but the key shift is conceptual. The dial is no longer just displaying time, it's marking duration. 100 years is not a feature, it is a claim placed after the rapid-fire watch montage. This reads like a reset point. We've just seen Rolex cycle through identity, tool, jewel, symbol, system and experiment. Now we get something that sits outside that cycle entirely. It suggests Rolex is not just curating watches, but curating its own historical positioning in real time. This could imply three things. One, centenary framing, Rolex subtly anchoring the brand in longevity, not products, but generational endurance. Patek Philippe, anybody? And two, legacy compression, all the previous watches become chapters leading to this idea. Rolex is a 100-year-old system of refinement. And three, future signalling. This actually might not be a product tease at all. It could be a directional marker, hinting at a commemorative model or design language shift built around heritage and permanence. If the rapid fire section was about short burst identity expression, then this is about identity justification. Not what Rolex makes, but why it has lasted long enough for this moment to really matter. Now we cut from engineered timekeeping into something completely different. Human time, a split second frozen at Wimbledon. Borg, mid-final volley, already past the ball release point. And then the aftermath, the slow fall to his knees after the victory is confirmed. This isn't celebration, it's what victory looks like when the tension finally leaves the body. The scoreboard in the background still holds the structure, numbers, order and outcome. The crowd is present but blurred, collective witnesses rather than participants. Borg is isolated in the frame despite being surrounded by people. But the key detail is not the win, it's the delay after the win. The moment where performance stops, but consequence hasn't caught up to reality yet. Placed after the 100 years watch fragment, this becomes a deliberate tonal shift. The watches were about constructed identity, engineered, controlled and designed. Borg is about embodied identity, what happens when control resolves into reality. In other words, Rolex shows you time as a system. Borg shows you time as lived experience. Borg collapsing to his knees, it's not weakness, it is release. A physical acknowledgement that time has been endured, pressure has been absorbed, and the final point has already passed through the body. This mirrors what Rolex just implied in the previous sequence: precision, control, endurance, and repetition under pressure. But here, those abstract ideas, they become human. We cut from sport, from physical exhaustion and release, into something colder, more staged, and arguably more permanent. The moment of recognition. Leonardo DiCaprio, tuxedoed, composed, holding the Oscar. The expression is not one of pure joy, it is controlled disbelief, almost rehearsed restraint. The award is already in his hand, but the emotional reality of it is still arriving. Catching up to reality again. This isn't the win. This is what the win looks like once it's been witnessed by everyone else. The gold Oscar trophy becomes a visual anchor. Pure symbolic value. No function beyond meaning. The blurred images behind DiCaprio dissolve individuality into spectacle. His expression sits in that narrow space between relief and safe public performance of emotion. Unlike Borg, who collapses into himself, DiCaprio holds the moment up. Placed after Wimbledon, this creates a very deliberate contrast in types of victory. Borg equals internal release, private, physical, uncontrollable, and DiCaprio, external validation, public, symbolic, and controlled. So the sequence shifts again from engineered time to lived pressure to institutional recognition. The Oscar is not just success, it is success after interpretation. The watches were never just about telling the time, they were about being recognised as something that endures time correctly. The Oscar sits at the top of that ladder. This clip isn't about winning an award, it is about time compressing into reputation, where performance stops being something you do and becomes something you are remembered for. We then move from recognition to something more immediate, not a staged award, not a cinematic acceptance speech, but the raw, physical aftermath of winning. Coco Gauff lifting the trophy and drinking from it. It's not about symbolism in the traditional sense, it is about contact. The trophy stops being an object of status and becomes something she physically interacts with, almost like a vessel that belongs to the moment rather than the history of the event. Then it shifts again from machines to people. Board collapses after victory. DiCaprio holds recognition as it arrives. Coco drinks from the moment itself. Different forms of winning, different relationships with time, but all of them human. And through all of it, Rolex stays still, constant and unspoken. Then comes the line that changes absolutely everything. 100 years. Not a product, but a position. Not what Rolex makes, but what it has survived long enough to become. And then finally, Oyster Story, 14th of April. This is Watches and Wonders. A story, a moment in the real world where it all lands. Because this was never just about watches, it was about how meaning is built. And when it is finally allowed to arrive, the real hidden message in the whole 16-second clip is this: we haven't even started yet. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Oh, Rolex, 45 minutes for a 16-second clip. Rolex released a second Watches and Wonders 2026 teaser video, and I'm late to this as I was at the Darren McGarvey latest book launch tour. These Rolex teaser videos, they are definitely trauma industrial complex, but that's okay because the smoke and mirrors have had some time now to dissipate. So with a little post-hype clarity, let's do a quicker breakdown this time. These are new watches hidden in plain sight. Welcome back to Horological. First, look at this reflection. That isn't a modern watch looking back at us, it is the 1926 original. We're seeing a ghost from a century ago, a cushion-shaped case, an onion crown, and those legendary Breguet-style hands. The watch in the water is the same watch Mercedes Gleitz wore on that English Channel swim. The first oyster case watch, created in 1926 and crossed the Channel in 1927. Now compare that ghost of the past to this high definition frame from the very first teaser video. This is the DNA that Rolex is leaning on for the 100th anniversary Oyster Perpetual. Look at the palm tips in those Breguet hands. But the real star is the dial. A deep concentric engine-turned guilloche pattern radiating from the centre. This is old world craftsmanship. We haven't seen this in the Rolex catalogue for decades now, between the coin-edge fluted bezel and that oversized Rolex Oyster branding. The message is clear, crystal clear. Rolex isn't just looking forward to 2026. They're reaching back to 1926 to redefine what luxury means for the next century. Now look at this dial closer. A vertical brushed finish in deep charcoal, almost slate grey. Industrial, modern. It catches the light in a way that feels incredibly premium. But the 100 years text, that is the game changer. Rolex almost never breaks their clean dial rule for commemorative text. This is a bold statement, no doubt about it, and the details here really matter. The markers, high polished yellow gold battens filled with crisp white lume. The bezel, a solid gold, domed form, perfectly polished. The minute track, simple, clean white ticks. This isn't a vintage reissue, it is a modern evolution of a classic. Rolex is taking the 100 years of Oyster story and stamping it directly on what looks like a new Oyster Perpetual two-tone 41. History imprinted onto the future of the brand. Then this macro shot, it gives us a forensic look at what could be something new for the 100th anniversary catalogue collection. The layout feels familiar, but the execution hints at something more exclusive. Look at the numeric track. The 25 at 5 o'clock is rendered in a crisp, sharp font that aligns perfectly with the high polished batten indices. This is a 41mm scale layout, a modern full-size case, but the fluted bezel steals the show, white gold facets cut with absolute precision, designed to be the crown of this anniversary release. Could this be the Land Dweller with a new dark green dial? A watch that was released with an exclusive honeycomb dial that has so far proved to be polarising. This could be a welcome addition to that range, giving it a more wearable in all circumstances frame. Or it could be a fusion of vintage and 6-digit reference Air King, but with a fluted bezel. That's an outside bet for sure, but it's worth taking a little side hustle at this point, isn't it? Look at the proportions, 41mm again, the sapphire crystal, it sits perfectly flush with the fluted bezel. That level of systems integration, that defines modern Rolex engineering. Now Rolex pulls the lens back, a vast open ocean, the text, a new century, but below the horizon, beneath the text, a stealth silhouette, a submarine just below the surface. That isn't accidental. For Rolex, the Submariner is everything. It is the Oyster, but on steroids. The Sea Dweller and the Deep Sea Dweller, all in the same lineage, and all punching well above their weight. We have seen the Trieste Bathyscaphe in the first teaser video. Could we be getting an updated non-desk diver dive watch? It now looks likely after the solid gold debacle of recent years. Are we righting that wrong? Because a submarine placed under new century signals a generational shift, perhaps a move into titanium, RLX titanium entering core catalogue models. This frame links 1926 directly to the high-tech future. Mercedes' original Oyster watch, and now a stealthy submarine lurking menacingly below the waterline. Rolex isn't just marking a century, they're revealing discreetly what controls the next one. Then comes the signature, a direct look at the winding crown, and something we've never seen before. Beneath the coronet, the number 100. That's a massive departure. Normally you get dots or bars for twin lock or trip lock systems. Here Rolex replaces that with a centenary engraving. This is the crown of the new Oyster Perpetual two-tone 41mm. We've seen several glimpses of it now. This isn't just a watch, it is a piece of history. Perhaps only 100 pieces of this been made. A watch for the whales if they can turn their eyes away from Patek for 5 minutes. The machining, sharp, high polish, contrasting the smooth bezel, yellow Rolesor gold against the 904L Oyster steel case. That 100 crown, it isn't just functional, it's a ceremonial celebration. A visible talisman marking a full century of the Oyster case. Then the bracelet, a different watch, a full 18-carat matte brushed yellow gold Oyster bracelet. The finishing is world class. Deep vertical satin brushing across the links. Balanced opulence. Look at the tolerances, remarkable in every single sense. The chamfers, softened edges gently catching the light. The taper, perfectly balancing the weight of a 41mm gold Oyster case. This isn't just a bracelet, this is Oyster language, engineered luxury at its end game. Then the clasp, an Oyster lock safety fold-over clasp, but finished like fine jewellery. The coronet is added on, polished to a mirror shine against heavy satinised brushing. The seams almost invisible, the edges bevelled, refined, the construction solid 18-carat gold, likely housing an EasyLink 5mm extension system. This isn't a fastener, it's a stamp of precision engineering and materials mastery at the highest level. A matte satin brushed 18 karat gold 41mm oyster perpetual centenary watch. God, that's a breathful, to go with the two-tone version that we've already seen a lot of. Then a subtle Easter egg, the text reads of achievements, but look at the bottom corner, a rainbow spectrum. That isn't a lens flare, that's refraction. Rolex is signalling optical precision, not just timekeeping, but control of light itself. Then everything suddenly shifts, a thick sapphire crystal raised high, a necessity for magnetic resistance. The crown, single horizontal line, twin lock identified, but look closer, a raised outer ring frame and crystalline bezel, protection from invisible forces. The proportions are thicker, built for a Faraday cage internal assembly. The Milgauss is back, not revived, re-engineered fully. Suddenly Omega's 15,000 Gauss magnetic resistance is no longer a current headline. Then another reveal, the caliber 4132, visible through a sapphire exhibition caseback, previously reserved for pieces like the Platinum Daytona 126506 and the Le Mans Special Edition. Now it appears here, that 18 karat gold rotor, Rolex Côte de Genève finishing, Chronergy escapement. Rolex has shown the movement. After 100 years, they are ready, no longer in the shadow of zenith. Patents filed for red ceramic that I already covered in my GMT Pepsi discontinued video. A red bezel Daytona to expand on that little hint of red on the Le Mans Special Edition perhaps. That was Rolex saying we can do this. Now they are saying we've mastered it. They might even do a Pepsi Daytona Seiko Pogue. Anybody? Then another Titan appears, a blue ceramic bezel, revised numeral system, a Submariner bezel, triple lock crown system this time, piston pushers. The Yachtmaster 2 returns, a smaller, more wearable oyster steel case, not just returning, a redesigned and a refined regatta experience. Then pure luxury, full 18 karat gold, fluted bezel, president bracelet, that unmistakable warm polished Rolex glow this time, no doubt with a new dial configuration to be revealed on the day itself. Finishing the watches in this teaser with absolute luxury and a little bit of remaining mystery. Then finally we get the closing image, the sun rising over open water. The submarine is gone, the way ahead is clear, a new dawn. The 14th of April, Watches and Wonders 2026. The Milgauss, the centenary dial oyster perpetual in two-tone and brushed satin gold. A red ceramic Daytona, a new Yachtmaster 2 and a full 18 karat gold date just, or perhaps both, but with unique dial configurations that Rolex are keeping for the day itself, making perfect sense of the cascade of escalation watch montage of the first teaser video. Rolex watches defined the last 100 years. Now we find out how they intend to define the next. But remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Oh, don't do a third teaser video, Rolex, please. This wasn't just a normal release cycle, this is a transition because something quietly just disappeared. The Rolex GMT Master 2 Pepsi is gone. No announcement, no replacement, and more importantly, no Coke, which tells you everything. Because if you want that configuration right now, you're not going to Rolex, you're going to Tudor. And Rolex are allowing that to happen deliberately. Because this isn't about a bezel, this is about the start of something much bigger, the quiet winding down of the current 40mm GMT Master 2 case. Before the shift to 41, and Rolex don't rush transitions, they stage them carefully, deliberately, over time, which means what we're seeing right now is the beginning, because this year isn't normal. This is the centenary year, 100 years since the birth of the oyster case, and 99 years since Mercedes Gleitze swam the English Channel with a Rolex hanging around her neck, proving to the entire world that a watch could survive where people barely could. And the next day, a full-page spread in the Daily Mail, not just marketing, validation. That very moment is why Rolex is the Rolex that we know today. So what you're about to see, it isn't just a set of new watches. This is a brand. This is a brand looking at its entire history and deciding what matters, what stays, what evolves, and what quietly disappears, because Rolex don't do randomness. Everything you're about to see fits into a structure, a progression from chaos to reflection, to clarity, to mastery, and beyond, into function, taste, and ultimately authority. And here's the reality: if you walk into your AD today, you might actually get one of these watches, because during transitional periods, windows open briefly before everything resets again. Now let's be honest, for most people that beige dial Rolex Oyster Perpetual is probably where this journey will start. Not the Daytona, not the day date, but that's how it always works, because Rolex doesn't just sell watches, they manage access in tiered stages, and right now access is shifting. So this isn't just about what's new, it's about what it means for the brand and for you. If you're thinking of adding your name to that waitlist, because timing matters, and right now timing feels very deliberate, let's go through them. Welcome back to Horological. This is a new Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36, and Rolex aren't calling it playful, they're calling it an explosion of colours, a masterful technique, a flourishing legacy. That's not marketing, that's positioning, because this isn't just a dial. This is Rolex taking their own name and turning it into the pattern. Not printed, not placed, constructed. Look closer. Every letter is part of the composition, 10 different colours, applied one by one, not all at once, a technique used extensively by our very own Glasgow brand, Pollen. This dial isn't painted, it is assembled layer by layer, alignment by alignment, until the entire surface becomes controlled chaos. And this is where it changes, because this isn't the celebration dial. That was random. This isn't. This is structured, deliberate, and designed to look accidental. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Sister creator Kent in the typography, Andy Warhol in the repetition of colour and composition, Keith Haring in the raw energy. This isn't a Rolex dial, this is pop art on a Rolex canvas. But here's the move: Rolex aren't referencing art, they're absorbing it, because the entire dial is now the brand. No logo dominance, no restraint, just Rolex everywhere. The specifications: a 36mm oyster case, 904L oyster steel, a twin lock crown, 100 metres of water resistance, oyster bracelet, 5mm easy link extension, and inside a superlative chronometer, calibre 3230, 70 hours of power reserve, a domed bezel, a gently domed sapphire crystal with AR in the inside only. All exactly what you'd expect, but none of that is really the point. The point is the dial, because while this explodes, everything else stays completely controlled, and Rolex know exactly what they're doing, because if this is too much, you've still got restraint. Black for discretion. Of the colours: turquoise blue, med blue, lavender, green, pistachio, candy pink, silver. And somehow this also works: beige, which is no right to be so compelling, but really is. So this isn't Rolex abandoning identity, this is Rolex proving that they can stretch it without breaking it. Because first they gave you colour, then they gave you chaos, now they're giving you authorship. This isn't decoration, this is Rolex writing their own name into their own history over and over and over again. First we had colour with a little chaos, now this is something else entirely. This is an echo. This is a new Oyster Perpetual, the Centenary Edition, and Rolex don't often give watches nicknames, the community does, but this time we will give them this one. This is the Echo of Origins, because this isn't a new design, this is a reflection, a watch that doesn't move forward without looking back. Yellow Rolesaur, steel and gold, but not how you expect it. No gold centre links, no full two-tone statement, just a bezel and a very special crown. Quiet touches of yellow gold, exactly where they used to be. And that matters, because this isn't luxury for attention, this is luxury for memory. Look at the crown, that's the number 100 in relief. Then on the dial, 100 years, sitting where Swiss made should be, and suddenly this isn't just a watch, it is a timestamp, because Rolex aren't celebrating time, they're marking their place in it. Brushed slate grey dial, new to the Oyster Perpetual range, muted, controlled, but not simple. Every 5-minute marker a green square, every detail deliberate. Even the Rolex name, printed in green, like the 126900 Air King, this is their colour, their identity, their signature, deliberately deployed. And this is the shift, because where the 36 Jubilee dial shouted, this one whispers with quiet echoes. The technical details, it is available in a 41, 36 or a 31mm Oyster case, 904L oyster steel in yellow gold, twin lock crown, 100 metres water resistance, oyster bracelet, 5mm easy link extension, inside the calibre 3230, 70 hours of power reserve, chronergy escapement, parachrome hairspring, and now the strengthened superlative chronometer certification. Everything exactly where it should be, because none of that changed, and that's the point. Rolesaur steel and gold, a Rolex signature since the 1930s. Not invented here, reinterpreted, stripped back and refined. This isn't Rolex reinventing anything, this is Rolex remembering everything. Because this watch, it doesn't need to prove itself, it doesn't need a colour, it doesn't need the chaos, it doesn't even need attention. Because after 100 years, Rolex aren't chasing relevance, they are the undeniable reference point of the whole industry. This isn't a celebration, it is a reflection, an echo of where it all began. First we had chaos, then we had reflection. Now this is clarity, not louder, not bolder, sharper. This is the new Rolex Datejust 41, and at first glance it looks familiar. Fluted bezel, Cyclops, date at 3, everything exactly where you'd expect it to be. But look again, because this isn't a redesign, this is a refocus. Rolex taking one of the most recognisable watches ever made and asking you to see it differently. Green lacquer ombre, but not how you've ever seen it before. This isn't sunburst, this isn't gradient for effect, this is depth. Green laid down first, then black, sprayed in concentric motions, closing in, darkening the edges, pulling your eyes straight into the cannon pinion. And that's the trick, because the dial isn't changing the watch, it's controlling how you see it. And suddenly the date matters more. That's Cyclops, sharper, clearer, framed by shadow. For the first time, the date just feels centred around the date, which is exactly what it was always meant to be. White Rolesaur, steel and white gold. but again restrained. The gold doesn't shout, it defines. Fluted bezel in white gold catching light, breaking it, turning function into identity, because Rolex don't reinvent watches, they refine their purpose. The specifications: it's a 41mm oyster case, oyster steel and white gold, twin lock crown, 100 metres of water resistance, a sapphire crystal, cyclop lens, oyster bracelet, 5mm easy link extension. Inside, the calibre 32-35, 70 hours power reserve, chronology escapement, parachrome hairspring, instantaneous date changeover, everything exactly where it should be, because nothing here is revolutionary, and that's the whole point. This isn't innovation, this is correction, a reminder of what this watch always was, because the date just was never about colour, it was never about complication, it was about one thing: the date, clear, concise, instant and unmistakable. And now, for the first time in a long time, everything points back to it, because this isn't Rolex looking forward and it isn't them looking back. This is Rolex tightening focus, stripping away distraction and letting the watch speak for itself, not louder, clearer. First they gave you chaos, then they gave you reflection, then they gave you clarity. Now this is what mastery looks like. This is a new Cosmograph Daytona, and Rolex aren't experimenting here, they are asserting control, because this isn't a redesign, this is a recalibration, a watch built in everything that the Daytona already is, but pushed just slightly off-centre. Releasium, steel and platinum, cold, dense, precise. A white enamel dial paired with an anthracite Cerachrome bezel. That's tungsten-rich ceramic. A platinum edge ring. This isn't materials contrast, this is tone redefined. And that's where it gets interesting, because this dial isn't trying to help you. White on white, low contrast, subtle separation, at a glance less legible than perhaps it should be, but not by accident, because this watch doesn't reveal itself until the light hits it fully. And when it does, everything changes. The hands catch, edges define, and suddenly what looked flat pops out and it becomes multi-dimensional. Look at that bezel, those numerals, horizontal, suspended, echoing the earliest Daytona designs, but rendered in a completely modern typeface. This is Rolex doing what they always do, not copying the past, echoing it, because nothing here is random, nothing Rolex does is ever random. Every detail is a design decision, and then they flip it over. Sapphire caseback, movement on display, held in place by a platinum ring, and that matters because Rolex don't do this lightly. We've seen it before in 2023, the Le Mans Daytona Special Edition, and before that a handful of pieces where Rolex allowed you to look inside. But this feels like an exception to the rule now, and more like a real culture shift. 40mm oyster case, oyster steel and platinum triple lock crown, 100 metres water resistance, Cerachrome bezel, sapphire crystal, inside the calibre 4131, column wheel chronograph, vertical clutch, chronology escapement, approximately 72 hours of power reserve, -2 and +2 seconds per day, superlative chronometer certified, everything exactly where it should be, because the performance didn't change, and it didn't need to. This isn't Rolex making the Daytona louder, it's them making it quieter, more subtle, more demanding, from a materials perspective, more complex. A watch that doesn't try to give you everything immediately, because this Daytona doesn't chase attention, but somehow it filters it. If you want instant clarity, this isn't the dial for you. But if you understand what it is that you're actually looking at, this is everything the Daytona has always been. Precision, control, intent, refined. But it looks like it may be an off-catalogue piece for now, because on the website I couldn't find prices yet. From chaos, reflection, mastery, clarity, something else, because not every Rolex is meant to shout. Some are meant to be understood quietly. This is the new Oyster Perpetual 28 and the Oyster Perpetual 34. Solid gold, but not how you expect. Because this isn't Rolex going bigger, this is Rolex going smaller, more restrained, more deliberate, more considered. And that matters because right now this space is moving. You've seen what Tudor have been doing in Asia, the 1926 moon phase, the celebrity collaborations, cultural positioning, a different kind of luxury. And this feels like Rolex entering without saying a word. Because this isn't status, this is taste. 18 karat yellow gold or 18 karat ever rose gold. But instead of high polish everywhere, Rolex do something unexpected. Satin finishing, soft, textured, almost muted, with just the bezel left to catch the light. This isn't gold for attention, this is gold for balance. Stone lacquer dials, green, blue, but then something new at 3, 6 and 9 natural stone hour markers. Heliotrope, dumortierite, cut to perfection to avoid reflection. Each one, same precise shape, but a slightly different form. Piece unique. Rolex introduces perfection to its range, and it's perfect because stone isn't uniform, it isn't controlled, it doesn't repeat perfectly. Organic formation, and that is the point. This isn't the industrial precision of mass-produced perfection. This is natural variation inside a Rolex. They're softening the edges, 28mm solid 18 karat yellow gold, green dial with green stone indices at the lower cardinal points, 34mm solid 18 karat ever rose gold, blue dial with blue stone indices at the lower cardinal points. Both have the Oyster bracelet, Oyster clasp with the easy link 5mm extension, 100 metres of water resistance inside the calibre 22-32, a siloxy hairspring, nickel phosphorus escape wheel, smaller watch, high efficiency technology, approximately 55 hours of power reserve, -2 or +2 seconds per day. But this is where it gets serious, because in 2026, with all the new watches, Rolex changed the standard, the new superlative chronometer certification. Not just precision anymore, now it's 7 pillars, an answer to Metas. Accuracy, water resistance, self-winding efficiency, power reserve, and now added resistance to magnetism, long-term reliability, sustainability and performance. Tested not just as a movement, but as a complete watch. Independently verified, every single piece, because this isn't just tighter tolerances, it is a broader definition of superlative excellence, and that fits perfectly here because these two watches aren't about pushing limits, it's about refining and redefining them, because these Oyster Perpetuals, they don't try to impress you, they assume that you already understand. Gold without excess, detail without noise, variation without chaos, and precision redefined. This isn't Rolex chasing attention, this is Rolex tuning itself to a different frequency, with a nod to a different market and a materials mastery seldom seen at this scale. More clarity, but it's mechanical this time. For years this watch, it made no sense. Too complex, too niche, too much. Now Rolex fix it. This is a new Yachtmaster 2, and this isn't a redesign, this is a correction, because this watch always had a purpose, a real one, a regatta chronograph, a programmable countdown built for the start of a race. The problem, it was never easy to use, and on the water, that's everything. Before it never sold, now it has a chance, but as always, time will tell. The entire countdown system, re-engineered, programmed through a single pusher. No more ring command confusion, no more unnecessary complexity, just control, and that changes everything. Matte white lacquer dial, reduced reflections, sharper contrast, cleaner layout, and then the big one, the countdown hands now run backwards, counterclockwise, because time is counting down. For the first time, this watch reads exactly how it thinks. 10 to 0, clear, structured, half minutes marked with triangles, a flange so precisely aligned it required a patent. This isn't styling, this is instrumentation, because this was never a luxury watch. It was a fine tool, and now it finally operates like one. 44mm oyster steel case. I predicted a smaller reissue, but look at the technology they have shoehorned into that case. The calibre is a masterpiece. Then that Cerachrome bezel, blue ceramic, bi-directional rotation, grip, control, precision, everything built to be used at sea under pressure, because Rolex didn't make it more complicated, they made it make sense. Some specifications: 44mm 904L oyster steel case, or gold if you will, 100 metres of water resistance, because in a regatta, if you need more, you're in real trouble. Triple lock crown, oyster bracelet, oyster lock clasp, easy link extension, 5mm. Inside, the calibre 4162 chronograph with programmable countdown, mechanical memory, on-the-fly synchronisation, Chronergy escapement, approximately 72 hours of power reserve, -2 +2 seconds per day, superlative chronometer certified, because the capability was always there. Now the clarity and ease of use is too. This isn't Rolex adding features, this is Rolex removing friction, because the Yachtmaster 2 was never misunderstood, it was under-realised. Too much watch behind too much complexity. Now everything aligns. Function, form, intent, a refined tool that finally behaves like one. Some watches tell the time, some watches tell a story, and some tell you exactly where you stand. This is a new Day-Date 40, and Rolex isn't updating it, they are elevating it, because this isn't about design, this is about presence. The Day-Date has always been that watch, the one you don't question, the one you don't need any explaining to understand. 18 karat Jubilee gold, a completely new alloy developed in-house, and it doesn't shout, it glows. Soft yellow, warm grey, hints of pink, not a colour but a visual effect, because this isn't gold for impact, this is gold refined beyond recognition. The dial light green aventurine, stone naturally reflective, almost alive, each dial slightly different, each one catching light in its own piece unique way. Paired with that soft gold, this isn't contrast, it's harmony, because nothing here is competing, everything is aligning. The day at 12, the date at 3, fully spelled out, fully framed, the most complete expression of time that Rolex makes. And they haven't changed it, because they don't need to. The specifications: 40mm oyster case, solid 18 karat gold, now Jubilee alloy, fluted bezel, 100 metres of water resistance, a sapphire crystal, cyclop lens, president bracelet, concealed crown clasp, inside the calibre 3255 day and date complication. 70 hours of power reserve, Chronergy escapement, parachrome hairspring, -2 to +2 seconds per day, superlative chronometer, present and correct. The movement capability was never in question. This watch doesn't evolve quickly, it evolves carefully over time, because it isn't chasing relevance, it defines it. This is Rolex personified into a single watch. This isn't Rolex experimenting, this is Rolex reinforcing material presence and identity, because the day-date doesn't need to be louder, it doesn't need to be sharper, it doesn't need to be anything other than what it already is. Complete. Gold redefined, time fully expressed, in presence, superlative. It doesn't beg for attention, but will always receive it. When you step back from all of this, what you realise is this was never about individual watches. Not really, because Rolex haven't just refreshed a collection, they've drawn a line between what they were and what they're becoming, from chaos to reflection to clarity to mastery, through function, through restraint, and ultimately into authority. That isn't just a product cycle, that is a statement, because while everyone else is chasing attention, Rolex are doing something much quieter. They are pulling away further into the horizon. They are tightening control of their design, of their materials, of their identity, and even of their own history, revisiting it, reframing it, rewriting it, but on their terms. And that's the real takeaway. Not which one is best, not which one's going to be the hardest to get, but how clearly each piece knows exactly what it is. No confusion, no overreach, just precision and intent. And for collectors, that is where the opportunity lies, because moments like this, transitions, they don't last long. This is where ranges shift, where references disappear, where new identities take hold. And if you're paying attention, this is where you position yourself, because whether it's a beige dial Oyster Perpetual or something far higher up the ladder, it all connects to the same idea, the same system, the same story that all started with a watch around a swimmer's neck and now sits at the very centre of the industry. This isn't Rolex trying harder, this is Rolex being exactly what they've always been, just clearer, more focused, more certain, and that's why it works. But remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Most people got this watch wrong immediately before they understood it, because the moment it dropped, the same lazy trope rolled out again. Why isn't Tudor making another dive watch? And that tells you everything. Welcome back to Horological. This is the Tudor Monarch, and this isn't a miss, this is a message, because on YouTube, Tudor only gets understood when it's underwater. Pelagos, Black Bay, loom-filled snowflake hands, that's where people are comfortable. Anything outside that, cognitive dissonance. A watch not analysed, dismissed, but this watch was never meant to be judged like that. Because this is Tudor's take on the original Oyster, and most people completely missed it. The irony is, the same people who have praised this watch have criticised this one. These watches are two sides of the same coin. This is the reflection in the water made real. Let's go back. Hans Wilsdorf didn't just create Rolex, he created Tudor in 1926, 100 years ago. And those early Tudor models, they weren't trying to be different, they were built using the original oyster case technology, the same foundation, the same idea. But a different execution. That relationship is the entire point. Now look again at this still from the second Rolex Watch and Wonders 2026 teaser video. Not the hype, but this historical detail In the reflection, this watch, the Breguet style hands, the small running seconds subdial, these early dial layouts, that wasn't random. That was a breadcrumb trail laid by Rolex and leading directly to Tudor. And then Tudor responded, not with a reissue, not with nostalgia, with interpretation. Because the monarch doesn't copy that history, it translates it, California dial, but not for vintage cosplay, a structured, deliberate layup pulled from a combination of those early oyster references. Breguet style influence, yes, but done through Tudor's own language, Tudor's own lens. Hollow snowflake hands, a small running second subdial, but sharpened, reframed, made modern. And then the case. This is where it gets aggressive, because the original oyster was soft, rounded, functional. This isn't. I think Mercedes would have preferred to wear this one on her wrist rather than round her neck, because this is angular, faceted, almost brutalist, like Tudor took something historic and forced it into the present. And this is where people lost it, because they weren't expecting Tudor to do this. So instead of asking, what is this watch trying to say? They asked, why isn't this a dive watch? Wrong question. Amateur hour. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because we've seen this before. The Tudor 1926 moon phase, that's my wrist check today. Same reaction, didn't fit the narrative, didn't get understood, got written off immediately by the same people. So now you've got a pattern. If Tudor makes a dive watch, instant approval. If Tudor does something thoughtful, confusion, then criticism. But this is where the monarch flips everything, flips that coin if you like, because the movement changes the conversation completely. The 1926 moon phase, modified Sellita SW200-1. Fine, expected and safe, grounded in Tudor's history of off-the-shelf movements. The monarch, not safe, unexpected, and in-house Kinesi calibre, the Tudor MT 5662-2U, master chronometer certified, COSC METAS, 65 hours of power reserve, silicon balance, full anti-magnetic spec. This isn't Tudor playing heritage. This is Tudor asserting control, because now you've got two watches, one rooted in shared history with Rolex, and one taking that same history and making it entirely Tudor's own. Design, execution, movement, all aligned to modern Tudor philosophy, and that's the part everyone missed. This watch isn't asking for approval. The details, 39mm 316L stainless steel case, 11.9mm thick, 48.5 lug to lug, 20mm lug width, faceted angular shapes, integrated feel but without full integration, screw down crown, no Tudor rose or shield, just text this time, 100 metres of water resistance, a flat sapphire crystal with the AR coating on the underside only. The T-fit clasp, microdust, all-day comfort, everything is here. It is deliberate, nothing accidental. So now we get to the real question, not do you like it? That's easy grade, amateur stuff. The real question is, did you understand it? Because if your first instinct when you see something different is to attack it instead of trying to understand it, then what are you actually doing in this hobby? Collecting watches or collecting reactions? Because this watch, it didn't fail, it just went over your head, and Tudor counted in that reaction. But remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Oh, can't you understand a simple Tudor? Bunch of wallopers. Watches and Wonders 2026, it didn't reveal new watches, it exposed the industry, because while some brands brought innovation to the table, others brought excuses. Welcome back to Horological. Grand Seiko brought several watches along to Watches and Wonders that are so limited they have already all been sold and are unavailable to buy. Here's what we can do, but you're not going to get one because we can only do 3 per year. Another watch based on a waterfall is limited to 50 pieces worldwide, with no two being alike. Case material grade 5 unobtainium. That's Grand Seiko's way of saying these watches are so complicated to do, we cannot possibly do it consistently. Panerai already cornered that market segment with the Carbotech watches, so nice try, Grand Seiko. But you can shove that watch right up your shoon bun. The Grand Seiko Diver. We did get a Grand Seiko offering that you can actually buy. The Ushio dive watch, a spring drive UFA movement, 2 versions, blue or green. The first dive watch to be equipped with the ultra fine accuracy quartz powered caliber 9R B1, the smaller version of that caliber, plus or minus 20 seconds per year, a full 3-day power reserve. Finishing quality and the Japanese sea-inspired dial are exquisite, as you would expect, but there is no escaping the fact that a Bulova Marine Star Precisionist that I have recently long-term tested was more accurate, and that a San Martin SN0147-G has a gradient sea-inspired dial that looks just as good at 30 centimetres away. Now that's food for thought. Hello, yes, yep. Joseph, it's San Martin on the phone. They want to collaborate and do a watch with you. The Grand Seiko EYO Blue, I'm only going to make a short honourable mention of this watch. Not because of its strange case diameter choices or its Puritan 9R31 hand-wound spring drive movement, but that bracelet, specifically that 9-link bracelet, I am in record as loving a historical 9-link. And for a brand often criticised for its bracelets, this is a standout moment. I mean, just look at it. But we do know that the clasp is, well, let's just say a little more traditional Grand Seiko level. Now we're on to JLC, Master Control Editions and Giro Tourbillon stratospherically expensive watches aside. The JLC that caught my eye this year was the Hokusai artwork adorned Reversal collection. World-class enamelling work depicting scenes those of us in the watch hobby are all terribly familiar with. You have the fringe benefit if you end up at a watch meet with a lot of Seiko nerds. You can hide the Hokusai and lord it over them like a hot horology protege just entered the space. The Patek Philippe automaton watch. We've not seen a Patek Philippe automaton watch for years now. Historically, some Swiss religious institutions would say that that's a good thing. These can be the devil's work after all. Full video coming in my channel later this year. But idle hands become the devil's playthings, so they say. So Thierry Stern paid handsomely into the collection box. Then Patek got busy and they gave us this masterpiece. I'm not going to detail it because all you have to do is look at it and you'll quickly realise that Tanya Edwards already approves of this one heading up the internal archive, with Tanya going head to head with Thierry Stern on many issues now. The crow versus the fox seems an apt applique for this very watch. If you like a wrist-worn device to tell you the time, you are not worthy, and Thierry will gladly handwrite you a letter outlining exactly why. Let's talk about Tudor, the Tudor Black Bay ceramic full murdered out edition, apart from the crown, and that's a good choice. a black ceramic implementation of a popular watch and bracelet combination. Great value for what you're actually getting. You could almost buy 2 of these watches for what Blancpain charges for just the ceramic bracelet alone. The added benefit of being prone to chipping under pressure, like a well-known ex-Michelin starred chef, is baked right in, whether it says Tudor or Blancpain on the dial. This one is a bargain at half the price. In fact, the only thing not getting murdered here is your wallet. Staying with Tudor, we've got the Tudor Black Bay 54 blue on blue, catching much less attention than last year's historically prototype-linked Burgundy Black Bay 58 release, especially when it found itself on the 5-link bracelet. Oh, that's a nice watch. I have almost bought that watch twice now. Perhaps it will be third time lucky, but not for this 37mm blue and blue, because while COSC certification and a sunburst blue dial are present, I'm afraid inspiration and imagination clearly left the meeting early. The Black Bay 58 blue is now missing in action, a bit like the Rolex Submariner white gold Cookie Monster. Combine that with the current demise of the Pepsi GMT Master 2, and it's a bad year for blue at the Wilsdorf Foundation. Yachtmaster 2 being an outlier yet again, it seems. Still with Tudor, the Tudor Black Bay 58 black on black, a new Meta certified movement with a massive portion of mediocre, it seems. It's slimmer, but no winner, not quite binner, imagination again, no glimmer. Buy a vintage Tudor Submariner instead, your watchmaker will love you for it. The Tudor Monarch, more important than it looks on the surface, really. I have made a full video going into detail in this and what this watch actually means for the brand in a much larger sense. Dismissed largely as not exciting enough, misunderstood in its intention by the desk diving hype chasers. My opinion, a worthy release that requires some dial options to really catch on. Those options are going to arrive throughout the year, catching small drip feeds of attention as and when Tudor desires. The 2-link bracelet and the T-fit clasp, they are highlights. One good dial colour option will ignite this watch and put it in front of the more mainstream buyers. But for now, this will sleep in the catalogue a little longer. We all love a sleeper, right? And finally, the final Tudor is the Tudor Black Bay GMT, available with a Coke bezel and a 5-link Jubilee style bracelet this year. So we got our Coke bezeled watch after all, just in a supermarket own brand version, because with Coke, as you all know, we prefer the real thing. IWC, the 1st of March 1965. That is when Omega got the Speedmaster officially qualified for all manned space missions. So for IWC to choose 2026 to launch their first space watch is quite frankly ridiculous. If IWC do make it to space with this watch and they look back at Earth, the only watches they will see will be Omega Speedmasters. Now I was going to bash JLC for coming late to this year's show with an integrated bracelet watch, after bashing Rolex for coming late to last year's show with the Landweller integrated bracelet watch. Rolex were late to the integrated party. JLC have arrived at the clean-up time after everyone has left that integrated party. But when compared to the timing IWC have chosen to show up at the Space Watch party, it's like going to a housing estate in Manchester thinking that the Hacienda is still open. It's Matthew for the Hacienda that screen prints those pollen clocks, by the way. It's like turning the TV on and expecting the We Choose to Go to the Moon speech still to be broadcasting live. There were some other IWC releases this year, but the Space Watch dumbfounded me so much I failed to take any notice of the rest of them.
This is a homage.
We choose to go to the moon.
This is a homage.
We choose to go to the moon.
This is a homage.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things.
This is a homage.
Cartier, After last year's well-received jump hour, Cartier have struggled to make as much of an impact this year. The Tank Normal nomenclature literally says it all. But if you can peer a little deeper into this year's collection, you will see that Cartier again have been on the money, focus on metallurgy. Rolex have also focused heavily in this area for this year's watches and wonders. Now, with gold prices being at an all-time high, I still can't figure out the strategy of bringing new gold alloys to market under the guise of some proprietary benefit other than diluting the gold. But it is a great way of maintaining margin in a gold rush price headwind, that's for sure. So here's the pattern. The best watches this year, you probably can't buy them. And the ones you can, they're playing it safe. And that tension is our industry right now. But remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Oh, don't start me in Panerai.
This is a homage.
If you don't understand watch language, you're effectively locked out of the hobby. If you spend any time round watches, whether it's watching reviews, reading comments, or just listening to collectors talk, you'll notice something quite quickly. People aren't just talking about watches, they're speaking a whole new language. Welcome back to Horological. Terms like GADA, tool watch, beater, heritage, vintage, over-engineered, in-house, they all get used casually, confidently, and often without any explanation. And if you're newer to watches, or even if you've been around them for a little while now, it can feel like everyone else got a rule book that you never received. So this video, it's not a glossary, it's not a beginner lesson, and it's not about telling you what to like. It is about decoding what people actually mean when they use these words and why that language exists in the first place. And I'm going to do that using watches I actually own. Not to show them off, but because the language only makes sense when it's lived with and put in the proper context. Let's start with a term you'll hear constantly. GADA, go anywhere, do anything. On paper it sounds like a watch that can survive a jungle, a boardroom and a black tie event without missing a single beat. But that's not what collectors usually mean. When people say GADA, what they really mean is this watch doesn't feel wrong anywhere. And one of the cleanest modern examples of this is the Tissot PRX. The PRX isn't extreme, it's not shouting about toughness, it's not pretending to be formal, it's slim enough to sit under a shirt cuff, sporty enough to wear casually, and visually coherent enough that it doesn't demand attention. That's the heart of GADA, not capability, balance. A true GADA watch avoids extremes, and that restraint is exactly why it works. Now contrast that with a very different term, tool watch. A tool watch isn't trying to transition, it's not trying to blend in. A tool watch commits to a job and everything else comes second to that job. The archetype here is the Rolex Submariner. Strip away the hype, the resale value, the cultural noise, and what you're left with is a watch designed around a single function, legible, reliable timing underwater, a dive watch. The bezel, the dial layout, the proportions, none of it is decorative, it's purposeful. Now yes, people wear Submariners everywhere today, but that doesn't change what the watch is. A tool watch isn't defined by where it ends up, it's defined by what it was built to do. That distinction between use and intent, it matters far more than specifications. Another category where intent is everything is the pilot's watch, and if you want to understand what a pilot's watch actually is. You need to ignore most modern aviation-inspired designs and look at a true Flieger, like one from Laco. A Flieger isn't romantic, it isn't nostalgic, it's large, stark, high contrast and unapologetically legible. Big numerals, matte dial, minimal finishing. A pilot's watch isn't about aviation aesthetics, it's about legibility when time really matters. Modern pilot style watches often borrow the look, but a Flieger is the pure function. And once you see that clearly, the design language suddenly makes sense. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood terms in watch collecting: homage.
This is a homage. This is a homage.
This is a homage.
For some people, the word triggers instant defensiveness, for others, instant dismissal, but the term itself is actually very simple. A homage watch isn't trying to fool you, it's deliberately borrowing a proven design and making it accessible. A good example of that is the Steel Dive SD 1970. The design it references is obvious. The branding is clear, the price reflects the intent, there's no attempt to imply heritage or history that just isn't there. Whether you personally like homage watches or not, that's a matter of subjectivity and taste. But technically there is nothing dishonest about a watch like this. Homage watches exist because great designs work, and not everyone wants the story, the mythology or the cost that comes with the original. Understanding that removes a lot of unnecessary heat from the conversation. Another term that gets used constantly and often incorrectly is chronograph. The chronograph is not just a watch with pushers, and it's not just a stopwatch feature. A chronograph is a watch designed around measuring elapsed time. One of the clearest examples of that philosophy is the Seiko Speed Timer Pogue reissue. Look at the dial layout, the colour contrast, the hierarchy of information. Everything is organised around the timing function. Many modern chronographs are lifestyle watches that happen to have a timing feature baked on top. A proper chronograph makes that feature the whole point, and a good rule of thumb is simple: if a chronograph is hard to read, it has missed the point. Now let's move away from those type of watches altogether, because another word that you'll hear all the time is beater, and often it's misunderstood. When collectors say beater, they don't mean cheap, they mean a watch that you don't have to think about. A watch that you can trust completely, a watch you don't baby, a watch that removes anxiety rather than creating it. And the purest modern example of that is the Casio G-Shock Square, the 5610U. It's shock resistant, water resistant, solar powered, radio synced, it doesn't need attention and it doesn't ask for care. If mechanical watches are about craft and intent, a G-Shock is about certainty. If mechanical or quartz analog watches are about craft and intent, a G-Shock is about certainty. Every collection needs a watch that you can beat up, not because it's bad, but because it's good enough to trust. That's what a beater really is. And before we finish, I want to add one more category, not a formal one, not a technical one, but just an honest one. The quirky watch. Not every watch in a collection earns its place through specifications, price or reputation. Some watches stay because they connect you to something bigger. In my case, that's an Armatron Griffey. It's not an expensive watch, it's not prestigious, it's not trying to impress anyone, but it connects me to my own family history in watch and clockmaking, and that gives it a weight no specification ever could. An edge, if you like. A quirky watch is one that tells your story even if nobody else understands it. And that matters, because collecting isn't about the constant upgrade cycle. So when you hear people talking about watches, when you hear terms like this thrown loosely around, remember this: they are not rules, they are shortcuts, ways of describing intent, purpose and feeling. There's no hierarchy here, no correct path. If a watch works for you, if it means something to you, it already matters. And once you understand the language, you're then free to completely ignore it. And that's the real point. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. This watch is wrong, not slightly wrong, not debatably wrong, fundamentally wrong. This watch doesn't hack, the rotor only winds one way, the finishing isn't haute horology, and yet I've been wearing it on and off for a few weeks now. I have quite enjoyed wearing it. It has very subtly been in the background of other videos and community posts. This watch might just surprise you. Welcome back to Horological. So this watch was sent to me by GEYA. I can keep the watch, but a little bit more than that later. GEYA have no editorial control over this video whatsoever. There is a discount code and an affiliate link in the description below, and it won't cost you anything extra, but it does support the channel. This is a paid promotion. Now, with that said clearly, the moment you actually get to spend time with this watch, you realise it's doing something very different. This is a GEYA G82 53 G Max, the PVD coated black version to be precise. And this is a lot of wrist presence that gets more right than it has any right to for the money it costs to buy. And the first thing you notice is that crystal, a curved sapphire crystal with gold tinted AR film. It is a real highlight of the watch. It's not subtle, but it's not trying to be. This is a big watch, 46.5mm, over 16mm thick. You don't wear this to disappear, but it doesn't wear like you think it will. The 22mm wide silicone strap is genuinely comfortable for all day wear. Soft, flexible, easy. It controls the 104g watch head very well, but it's not just the strap. There's a slight curve built into the exhibition caseback that helps it sit in the wrist far better than the size would suggest. Between those two things, it's far more wearable than it initially looks. Inside the movement is the Shanghai Jingye JH3106, and this is where the conversation usually changes, because on paper this is entry level. It doesn't hack, the rotor is unidirectional, it only winds one way, plus or minus 10 seconds per day. I tested it, several positions, it held to specification, just. The Rishi wasn't washy here, but it's not the most refined calibre. Although in use it's genuinely better than you'd expect. The winding is smooth, and that oversized 10mm embossed crown, it makes it genuinely easy to use. You can feel the rotor on your wrist. There is a little bit of mechanical character to it, but not quite Panerai Carbotech levels of character. It is not refined, but it is fun. And when you step back and you look at it, this is a simpler movement, that unidirectional self-winding system, no hacking mechanism. And in theory, that kind of simplicity often tends to favour long-term reliability. Swatch employ the same tactics with their System 51, but reliability is something we'll find out over time, because I've only had this for a few weeks. And with the rotation that I run, it's not going to get a real test. So this watch is going out into the real world. Friends, family, a daily wear loaner watch. And in a couple of months, we'll come back to it and we'll see how it actually held up in real life, how the PVD coating has fared, how the movement has performed. Is the crystal blemish free? Has the gold inner AR coating lasted? Because specs will tell you what a watch should do, but wrist time in the real world will fully inform you what it actually does. And this is really what this watch is. It is a budget way into a skeletonized tunnel cased watch. an accessible gateway into a form factor often gatekept behind 5 figures or sometimes more.
This is a homage. This is a homage.
This is a homage.
It gives you the experience, at least partially, of an RM or a Hublot on wrist. Heavier to wear, yes, but similar physical presence. GEYA will sell you a carbon version if weight is an issue. Even a version with a tourbillon if that's your thing. Abraham Louis Breguet fully approves. You can see it working, you can see through it. At a recent Science Centre event, we looked at this watch under their public microscope. We were suffering from focal temperature drift as it was unusually warm that day. We persevered and we had a good look at the 8 layers of skeletonization. Remarkably, it held up well to that level of magnification. I was there as part of a larger science, technology, engineering, maths event, a STEM project. I showed this watch to many people that day. I used it as a group talk prop. The space theme of this watch went down well with the STEM crowd. This watch is tangible, you interact with it, it feels mechanical, it has interesting lume. This isn't haute horology, but that might be exactly why it works. Turn it over and there's a little bit more going on. This version is themed around the current Chinese space program. The Chinese Tiangong space station features on the exhibition caseback. Tiangong roughly translates as Heavenly Palace. It's a small detail, but it gives the watch a bit more identity. And back to that lume, it is the space station with its solar arrays fully extended, but right on your wrist. It also comes with a scale model Chinese space shuttle, or at least it should have. I requested this one with the Spaceman to compare it to my Omega one, which I can't do because it has already disappeared. I have a strong suspicion my space travel obsessed 6-year-old knows exactly where it is, but she won't tell me. And that probably tells you everything about how this watch and brand fitted into the chaos of my life. Now, the biggest flaw that I could find isn't the movement. It's the strap, the spare red strap to be precise. It came with silver hardware, while the watch and original strap hardware itself is black PVD. At first that looks like it could be a mistake, but maybe it's just not that simple, because matching that properly means one red strap with 2 SKUs. As this strap ships mostly as the extra strap with the polished steel version of this watch with the red anodised crown. 2 inventories, twice the complexity. So what you're looking at isn't laziness, it's just a pragmatic decision. And realistically, if you plan on wearing the red strap long term, you can swap the buckle and tang over in about 2 minutes with a spring bar tool and never think about it ever again. Although the supplied straps themselves are quick release and very easy to change. The only other issue is dial legibility, but that's the trade-off that must be made with any skeletonized dial. This issue is one of the actual design language and not of the individual watch itself. The packaging for this watch is impressive. Everything came incredibly well wrapped, and that does come at a cost. Some collectors would rather that money went into the watch itself, but this isn't really positioned as a collector's tool watch. It is positioned as a gift watch, and in markets like China, that presentation really matters. So in that context, it makes perfect sense for GEYA to invest in how they package this watch. You also get a 2-year international warranty, which adds a bit of reassurance. And between that and the several month daily wear test we're going to run, we'll get a much clearer picture over time of how this watch holds up. All in all, this feels like a bit of a culture shift. It's got that big, almost RM wrist presence, but it doesn't feel like it was designed purely for the Western collector market. There's a lot of Chinese domestic character in this watch. GEYA make a dragon version and a Great Wall version of this watch. They are celebrating Chinese cultural achievement through horology, as they should, and that's probably why it stands out and exactly why I like it. This isn't a perfect watch, but it's not trying to be. It is a statement piece, and no statement piece is ever perfect at any price. If your collection doesn't have a tonal case or a skeleton dial, this watch could fill that gap instantly. So what is it? It's not refined, it's not precise to the second, it isn't haute horology, but it is a whole lot of wrist presence that gets more correct than it has any right to do for the money GEYA currently ask for it. It's not trying to be the best watch. We don't always wear our best watch anyway, right? But it is trying to be the watch that you actually consider wearing anytime you need to make a bold, confident statement. And if you do want one, there is that discount code and affiliate link in the description of this video. Don't pay full price. Like, share, get subscribed, and remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. What if Tudor's biggest problem right now is that their watches look worse in their own marketing footage? Not slightly worse, not debatably worse, but genuinely worse than they do in real life? And that question, it really hit me hard the other day. Because I get hands-on with the new Tudor Monarch, and in hand it blew me away. Under some admittedly rare Glasgow sunshine, the vertical brushing on that dial was absolutely spectacular, and the stunning concentric circle details on the running second subdial, a very well executed dial by anyone's standards. If you make it to the end of this video, I've got some future dial options to share with you, and perhaps a hot take or two. Welcome back to Horological. It looked deliberate, it looked expensive, it looked nothing like it did in the marketing shots, and that's when it clicked. This isn't the first time I've seen this, because if you look at the internal marketing release shots commissioned by Tudor, they have not done this watch any favours at all. But this isn't a new thing. In an earlier video, I talked about how I ended up buying a Tudor 1926 Lunar moon phase. When I first saw that watch online, I wasn't too keen. The dials looked flat, muted, but in real life, under real light, completely different. All three variants were strong, but the blue in particular caught my eye, and that was it. Deposit down, ordered there and then, job done. So now I'm starting to recognise a pattern here, because when you actually handle these watches, Tudor aren't missing anything. Take the clasp architecture on both watches underneath. It is essentially the same system. A security fold over, 4 ceramic bearings inside the clasp that gives you a real snap fast performance, a very positive action. But more importantly, long-term reliability with almost non-existent bearing wear. That Monarch uses the Shield logo on the safety fold over. The 1926 has Tudor engraved along the main body. It's a different execution, but the same engineering. Then the bracelet, excellent in both watches. The Monarch's 2-link is very distinctive. The 1926's 7-link is genuinely sublime for the money you pay. And then you get to the movements. The 1926 package leans heavily into an off-the-shelf base, a modified Sellita SW200-1. Proven, reliable and easy to service, even for me on a good day at the bench, but the Monarch is a different level. It's an in-house Kinesi MT5662-U, Kosk, Metas, essentially as accurate as a Swiss lever escapement mechanical watch can get, plus or minus 0.5 seconds per day, a 65-hour power reserve. It is an excellent movement. So again, you have to ask the question, why is a brand as big as Tudor not able to capture the magic of these watches in their own marketing shots? Have we sanitised professional watch photography so much with soft filters and After Effects that we have stripped out the very thing that makes the watch special in the first place in real life? Or hot take, Tudor knows exactly what they're doing here, because if the marketing images don't quite land, you go to the boutique and that's where the magic really happens. That's where the secret sauce reveals itself in the flesh, under real light, and that's what drives the sale. Because in hand, the Tudor Monarch is a watch to behold. Now, who really knows what these brands are thinking behind the scenes? But I do know this from speaking to a few friends and various authorised dealers. Lighting strategy is not random. It is a well-documented area. There are actual scientific metrics involved and at play here. Colour theory, material response, controlled lighting environments. This is engineered. And then you have the final piece of the puzzle. Sorry to interrupt the flow, but YouTube Analytics has just emailed me as I edit this video. Just over 89% of my viewers right now are unsubscribed to the channel. If you genuinely enjoy this type of content and you want to be part of our growing horological community, get in the comments, tell us what your wrist check is right now, and get subscribed. Now let's get back on with the show, because there are dial option renders to share at the end of the video. Because a lot of the initial reaction to the Monarch, it came from the Tudor fan base wanting another marquee dive watch. And if you're not into the Black Bay ceramic, which in hand is also a very intriguing watch with some genuinely interesting ceramic light play going on, but look at the shot Tudor uses on their website. Oh, in the boutique, this watch is stunning, but this website shot is completely flat. There is a pattern here. It still sits within that familiar Black Bay form factor. The photography does not do it justice. But what needs to be understood here is what Tudor have actually given us, because the Monarch isn't random. It is a modern interpretation of the original oyster concept from 1926. Because it's not just the lighting they're controlling, it is the story. Because the Monarch isn't just a random release, it is a modern ghost of the original 1926 Rolex Oyster. The same lineage tied to Mercedes Gleitze and that historic English Channel swim in 1927 and the California dial. That's not just styling, that is a combination of all the dial options that were available back then. Even referenced in the full page spread Hans Wilsdorf placed in the Daily Mail the very next day. So no, you didn't get a new dive watch this year. What you actually got was a modern version of one of the very first water capable watches ever made. Tudor even has dial colour options in the works. Miami Blue, a previous heavy hitter for the brand. Gloss Black, a wider, more orthodox appeal. And finally, Candy Pink. This is the watch David Beckham will be seen wearing. Historically, Tudor's first purpose-built dive watch, the Oyster Prince Submariner, referenced 7922, it didn't arrive until 1954, 28 years later, and the Rolex Submariner itself, 27 years later. So if you're waiting for that next dive watch release, you might be waiting quite a while, but maybe that's the point. Maybe Tudor didn't fail to capture the magic. Maybe they just left enough out so you'd have to go and see it at the boutique for yourself, because in hand they are completely different animals. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological.